And a good Monday, everybody. Welcome to the Sports Bash live on 97.3 ESPN, the free mobile app. And, of course, if you're watching the show live on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter, what's going on, everybody? Good to have you with us. As what a weekend it was. What a day it's been already. The Eagles have made a pretty, I want to use the word significant in terms of this gentleman's resume. I don't know how significant he will be in the 2021 season, but the Eagles have signed the Washington football team's all-time sack leader. No, not Dexter Manley. Not Charles Mann. Ryan Kerrigan. You know Ryan Kerrigan. He has caused terror in Eagles' backfield for years. Well, now he's wearing the midnight green. He signed with the Eagles today. A one-year deal. Ryan Kerrigan gets to play in Philadelphia, which kind of makes an interesting situation here. Because Ryan Kerrigan has kind of been a, sack specialist, 96 total sacks with Washington. 13 and a half of those 96 sacks have come against Philadelphia. He has more sacks against Philadelphia and against Dallas, 13 and a half, than he does any other team in football. Now, of course, he plays those two teams the most. But, man, to get Kerrigan, it's interesting because where are they going to play Kerrigan? I would envision Kerrigan is in the role of, like Chris Long was a couple of years ago, that third down pass rushing specialist. He had 5.5 sacks last year in limited play. And if you remember, how many people remember Kerrigan in week 1 against the Eagles? He was the damn defensive player of the week. I mean, he kicked their butts last year. So the Eagles, the problem there was they had Chase Young and Montez Sweat. There was just no room, no snaps for Kerrigan. But look, he's 33 years old. He'll be 33 when the season starts. But he comes to Philadelphia, and if you recall, the Eagles, I think, had the third most sacks in football last year. I think only the Rams and the Steelers had a higher sack rate than the Eagles did. So you add Kerrigan to this mix. You've got Brandon Graham, Josh Sweat, Derek Barnett, and now Ryan Kerrigan adding to the mix here. I don't know what kind of sign. Like, I look at it as a twofold signing. One, you get a veteran player who maybe has a little left on the tires. Who knows? But you have a lot of young players that you just drafted. And some of those guys are now going to have Ryan Kerrigan to learn from. So the Eagles make a smart decision, almost like adding another coach when you think about bringing Kerrigan in to your defensive line room. Here's a guy who is the all-time sack leader for one of your biggest rivals. Now, this isn't, hey, they are going, their focus is now trying to win a Super Bowl. I don't think bringing Ryan Kerrigan changes the expectations for this season, but I like it for teaching the younger players, adding depth to this team, and for God's sakes, not having to see him wearing 91 on that other side of the ball twice a year. That will be a benefit. But it's an interesting signing because Kerrigan's a guy who, is certainly at the end of his career at 32 years old. And he's a guy that, the message seems to be one of two things. Hey, we need to beef up the defensive line because we can't find a corner that we want. Our corners are so bad that, all right, how do we fix that? All right, we'll go out and get more corners. We'll go out and get more pass rush. But Kerrigan requested a trade, back in November of last year because he saw his playing time was obviously down. But in the time that he got a chance to play, he still was pretty darn productive last year. In that game against Philadelphia, you remember that first game of the season? He had 2 sacks in that game. He was all over the field. I don't even think he played 20 snaps. But he's a guy that certainly helps the defense out. I don't think this is a bad deal by any stretch. But let's just not get excited to the point that this team is, bringing in the player that we remember causing all sorts of problems to the Eagles for the last 10 years. The Eagles had 49 sacks last year. That was 3rd in the NFL. And they now add a guy who is known for getting the quarterback. So it's a good, smart deal, I think, for Howie Roseman. I don't know how much he paid for him. I don't know what their anticipation of what kind of playing time that he will be providing for you. But what I do know is that they got a good one, a good teacher, a good locker room guy, a guy who can teach and lead. And they keep in mind, like if you look at the Eagles depth chart at defensive end, for Kerrigan, he's got Graham, Barnett, Sweat. After that, Joe Osman, Matt Leo, Taron Jackson, Patrick Johnson. There's not a lot of veteran presence on that defensive line past really Graham. I mean, Derek Barnett, I guess, but he doesn't strike me as the leaderish type. Other than Brandon Graham, that's a very young defensive end room. So I'm interested to see what their plans are for Kerrigan. We'll talk to Mosher at 4 o'clock for football at 4 today as the Sports Bash is live on 97.3 ESPN. So that's kind of kicking off the day. Number 2 on the agenda, as we are jam-packed busy on a Monday, as we typically would be after the weekend, the 76ers on Friday night. You know, Friday afternoon, we did the show. Derek Elder is watching the show on YouTube. Glad to see Kerrigan on our side. He owned our ass. Yeah, he did. You're absolutely right about that, Derek. Right? I mean, just a real quick, when you say that, Kerrigan, I felt like every time Philadelphia played Washington, that Kerrigan had 2 sacks every game. Doesn't it feel like he had 2 sacks every single time you played them? Literally, it felt like you gave up 2 sacks to him every single time they played. And when I looked at today, because, you know, I said, what has Kerrigan done against the Eagles? Like, I had to go and check this out. And I got to have more sacks against the Eagles than anybody else, right? How about Torrey Smith's tweet, by the way? Torrey Smith, the former Eagles wide receiver, tweeted the Spider-Man 2 guys pointing back and forth at each other and wrote Chris Long in 2017 and Ryan Kerrigan today. So at least one former Eagle saw the parallels between those two. Like, they brought in a veteran guy who seemed like he was at the end of the line in New England, and Philadelphia said, hey, we need a veteran like role-playing defensive end. You know, why not bring in? He's, well, Kerrigan's been kind of a 3-4 outside linebacker for Washington. I would imagine he's back to playing defensive end where he started his career. He's been an outside linebacker in Washington. So is he going? Are the Eagles going to use him in that mode? I mean, he was kind of, back and forth the last couple of years as that pass rushing specialist, kind of stand up and rush from the outside. So I wonder if the Eagles envision him just being a stand-up pass rusher. That's another question is, because if you look at what he did, he a lot of times would line up. Last year, if you remember game 1, Lane Johnson did not play in that game, and he absolutely tortured Jack Driscoll over there. So I'm interested to see if they put him as a classic 4-3 down lineman, which I don't think would be the case, or is he going to be kind of a stand-up outside linebacker? It's interesting because Washington used him, they have Chase Young and Sweat over there, which is why he could not really get out on the field. He only played 20, 25 snaps a game for I keep wanting to not say their former team name. So I'm kind of like, the Washington football team. But when you look at their defense, Sweat and Young, they are both defensive ends, which is why Kerrigan couldn't get in the field. So they were kind of using him as a defensive end. But he has done some pass rushing standing up without his hand on the ground. So I'm interested to see if, because what have I said, and Mosher and I used to get into this discussion a lot about not having good blitzers and that there is an art to being a good blitzer, right? There's an art to being a timely blitzer, and that people wanted Jim Small. I said, well, he doesn't think he has good blitzers on his team too. Like, there is something to be said for that. Kerrigan would be a guy who would be classified as a good blitzer. You go back. All right. So Kerrigan, 13.5 sacks against Philly, 13.5 against Dallas. Yeah, that's what I said. Those are the two teams he has terrorized the most. He's played 19 games against Philly. He's played 19 games against Dallas. Now he has 13 sacks against the Giants. I mean, he has dominated this division. He has 96 total sacks. And, I mean, he's got probably half of them have come playing inside his division. He's played 19 games against those three teams, and he whipped Dallas 13.5 times. He's whipped Philly 13.5 times, and he's whipped the Giants 13 times. It's pretty unbelievable when you think about it. And against Philadelphia, not only does he whip them sacking, he has 51 tackles against Philadelphia. He's got 15 tackles for losses against Philadelphia, and he's got 24 quarterback hits. He's hit Eagle quarterbacks more than any team by far. The next team are the Giants and the Cowboys 18 times. He's hit Eagle quarterbacks 24 times. And keep in mind, the Eagles typically have the best offensive line in the division. So it's pretty crazy. 13.5 sacks in 19 games. Now, I don't know what kind of production you're going to get out of him, this version of him, but I'm just glad that he's not going to be lining up on the other side of the ball anymore. My gosh. Again, last year, he played the game against Philadelphia. He had 2 stats. He was the defensive player of the week. Jeez. So good stuff. Getting Kerrigan here can't be a bad thing. I don't think here's a guy who just completely shot. I don't think he's completely at the end of the road. I think, you can have a role for him. There's a role for him. Pass rushing specialist, playing 50% of the snaps, coming on third down, line up with the hand, standing up off the ground, hitting the outside. Here's a guy, you have him and Brandon Graham coming from the edge together. Brandon Graham is one of those guys. He doesn't get the sacks, but he gets the pressures and he creates havoc. Now they have a guy that can help clean up the mess. That's something that Kerrigan does a good job of, kind of cleaning up the mess. He gets to the quarterback. Where Graham gets a lot of pressure, Kerrigan gets the job done. Don't diminish guys who know how to sack the quarterback. Don't diminish the guys who have that innate ability to get you. And Ryan Kerrigan's one of those guys. 609-403-0973. 609-403-0973. That is the text board if you want to jump on with your thoughts on the Eagles getting Kerrigan. How do you envision his role? I mean, does this move push your pile at all? Like, oh, you know what? They added a real player, right? They added a real player. This is funny. Smith6 is watching the show. My friend posted a meme of Lane and Kerrigan meeting for the first time in practice. It was the Rock and Stone Cold stare down. That's really good. I like to see that meme there, Smith6. Yeah, I envision like one of those, or like, you remember when The Rock wrestled Hulk Hogan at WrestleMania, and it was like the two of them staring at each other and like looking out to the crowd like, can you believe we're in the same ring together here? I'm like 60 years old, Hulk Hogan and The Rock, like that, like the same type of situation there. That's a good one there, Smith6. This one's from Jeff Bone and Pookie. He says, I used to hate Kerrigan when he played against us. That guy is a beast. Now, keep in mind, Kerrigan, while he had a solid year last year, 5.5 sacks, he didn't start last year for them. I don't think you're getting the same player, Jeff, that, you remember. I mean, at 32 years old, he'll be 33 years old when the season starts. Now, I think Brandon Graham is also in that same draft class. So Brandon Graham has got to be 32, 33 years old. And we don't think differently. I don't think we think all that differently about Brandon Graham than we do. So that's 33. So Brandon Graham, same age as Kerrigan. So I don't think that means just because Kerrigan was a part-time player last year. He was a part-time player last year because of their personnel. I mean, they had two of the better pass rushing defensive ends in football. So I don't think last year is an indication that Kerrigan shot. I just think Kerrigan was used in a role that team could use him for. Brett is watching on YouTube, says, great addition to the front seven. Now let's address that CB2 position. This is the interesting part, Brett, and I'm right there with you. If they get a corner, does that change the perception for a lot of people, this team's ceiling? If the Eagles get a corner now, let's say they bring in Steve Nelson, okay? If the Eagles bring in Steve Nelson, does that change your perception of what you think the ceiling of this team is? 609-403-0973. Can't believe that Eagles, this is on the text board, by the way. Cole is listening to the show in Long Beach Island. I haven't been up to Long Beach Island in quite some time, Cole. Where should I go up there? If I'm taking a drive to LBI, where am I going? He says, can't believe the Eagles had that many sacks. Looking at the stats, you guys didn't even have any player in the top 20 in sacks and only 2 in the top 36, but everyone complained about Schwartz not blitzing enough. Seems like he didn't have to. Well, that was the Eagles. That was their defense. They played a wide 9, let the front 4 get to the quarterback. And you had Brandon Graham, you had Josh Sweat, you had Derek Barnett. The Eagles get an inordinate amount of sacks from their tackles. Defensive tackles are not pass rushers, but you have Fletcher Cox and Javon Hargrave. Those guys are better pass rushers from the defensive tackle position than your standard, clogger. And the Eagles had 2 pretty good upfield pass rushers. So that's where a lot of their, they get a lot of sacks from the defensive tackle position that a lot of teams, like, Aaron Donald gets a lot of sacks from the tackle position. That's why the Rams are one of the better sack teams in the league, is because your defensive tackles is a position that typically doesn't get sacks. You're getting Fletcher Cox, I think, at 8 sacks, from the tackle position. Ryan Felucci is watching the show on YouTube. What's up, Rye? Says, I like this move. Kerrigan, he can help this young linebacker core development. I think he can be more of a role player, and our defense could be like a third down pass rusher. Yeah, that's the question, Rye. Are they going to play him I think they're going to play him at defensive end. That's, it's interesting. He was listed as an outside linebacker with Washington. He did a lot of stand-up linebacker, but I think he's going to be kind of like a rotator with Brandon Graham. I think he would be more of, like, he played defensive end earlier in his career. A lot of action today on this move. Derek's watching, says Chris Long was 32 when he came to the Eagles. He was key to that D and on the Super Bowl team. Yeah, I'm not looking at 32 and saying he's shot. Right? I'm not saying he's a shot fighter at 32. Plus, keep in mind, last year, not a lot of track on the tires. Didn't play all that many snaps last year. I think he played 22 snaps in the game against Philadelphia. I'm imagining he was probably around that number. He only started 1 game last year. And keep in mind, they had Chase Young and Montez Sweat getting a lot of the pass rushing opportunities for them. 609-403-0973 is the text board. 609-403-0973. So, he's kind of that, that edge rusher. If you want to say defensive end or linebacker, he's an outside edge rusher is what he is. 95.5 sacks, 147 quarterback hits, all-time sack leader for the Washington football team. He played 38% of the snaps last year, which is the lowest of his career. And now he will join a defensive end rotation that only really has Graham, Barnett, and Sweat. He would be right there with those guys. So there you go. I think he's going to be used as a defensive end, which is what I kind of thought. All right, Sports Bash Live, 97.3 ESPN on a Monday. Jam-packed. McGarry at the bottom of at the 40 mark of the hour. Hudrick. We're getting into the Sixers on the other side. the number one seed for the first time in 20 years. Geoff Mosher, football at 4. Bob Wankel on the Phillies disaster weekend. My gosh, that was a mess. Do you remember? How about this? I'll tease you with this for Do You Remember? The Phillies couldn't score Saturday night, but do you remember them scoring a lot of runs on this day? All right, that's coming up at 4:25. Mitch Lawrence, Sirius XM NBA Radio, and Jeff Kerr going to talk more on the NFL NFC East with Jeff here on the Sports Bash. We are just getting started. Sports Bash brought to you by Matt Blatt Kia. They want to get you approved today. Matt Blatt, 6211 Black Horse Pike in Egg Harbor Township. Follow me on Twitter at Mike Gill Show. And, of course, download the free mobile app and listen to the show wherever you roll, on your phone, on your laptop, on your device, 973 ESPN/app. right, Sports Bash 97.3 ESPN. Kerrigan wrote on Instagram, says, quote, I know I probably wasn't your favorite player over the past decade, but Eagles fans, I'm fired up to be playing for you guys now. LFG. You know what that means. Kerrigan wrote on Instagram. So he's ready to go. He mentioned as well through John Keim over at ESPN, who covers the Washington football team. They've got Brandon Graham and Derek Barnett, guys who are entrenched and bona fide studs in this league. But I know they rotate their guys a lot. Whether I'm a starter or a reserve, I still imagine I'll get a lot of playing time, and that was big for me. And that is why he signed with Philadelphia, because he thinks he can still play. And look, a lot of guys think they can still play, and sometimes they can, sometimes they can't. Very tough. Durable guy, 95.5 sacks, most ever. Played every game but 4 in his career. And since 2011, when he got drafted, 5th most sacks, 7th most tackles for losses. This is now the Eagles' defensive front. When you think about Graham, Kerrigan, Barnett, Josh Sweat, Fletcher Cox, Javon Hargrave, it's a pretty deep bunch of pass rushers there when you think about it. And over on the tech sports, 609-403-0973. Guys, if the Eagles sign Steve Nelson, it definitely changes my perception. They stay healthy, particularly the O-line, and they win the division. Pretty interesting now. All of a sudden, one signing has changed the perception of some fans out there. Has it changed the perception for you? 609-403-0973. Hit us up on the text board with your thoughts as Ryan Kerrigan signs with the Eagles today. And, you know, it's a kind of a surprising move when you think about it. I mean, this is a team that most people feel is not a playoff-worthy team. A lot of people feel that this team is, you know, for the most part in rebuilding mode, and they go out and get a veteran player who's a proven pass rusher, a relentless guy, you know, really tough, but he's a leader on and off the field. And Lane Johnson even said that it reminds me a lot of the Chris Long signing in 2017. And if you remember, when the Eagles signed Chris Long and some of these veteran players that they brought in 2017, it was kind of like, they didn't move the needle all that much. Like LeGarrette Blount, right? Patrick Robinson, it was kind of like, Chris Long, Torrey Smith. You know, these were all kind of, you know, second, third tier type of players that didn't get you all that excited when they brought these guys in. This move, Anthony Harris, Eric Wilson, Ryan Kerrigan, you know, Harris, at one point, Anthony Harris was regarded as one of the better playmaking safeties in the league. You know, if you remember going back, not even that long ago, I think if you go back like 3 seasons, and when he was with those good Minnesota defenses, back when they were playing at their height, Anthony Harris, I say 3 seasons, well, from this year, just 2 years ago, 2019, he led the league in interceptions. You know, last year did not have the interceptions, 0. But the year before, he had 6 interceptions. The year before that, he had 3 interceptions. These type of signings seem similar to the 2017 signings, where Anthony Harris is kind of like Patrick Robinson. Okay, I'm not all that, you know, you're not all that excited about it. Eric Wilson, you're kind of like, okay. Here's a guy who will be on the field and give you starting snaps. Anthony Harris, same thing. Ryan Kerrigan, very Chris Long feeling. So it seems that Howie Roseman is going back down the road that he knows the most. Let me bring in these veteran players who have a role. It's not a big role, but it's a key role on this team. 609-403-0973 over on the text board. Mike, the Eagles are better than everyone thinks, and I like it that way. Have a good day and go Birds. Well, I've been saying that for a while. You don't need to convince me. Hey, look, I'm an offensive line kind of guy. You give me a good offensive line, and I feel like I can win. As long as the Eagles' offensive line remains healthy, I have no doubt that they're in this to the end. Nick from Brigantine says, Mike, I like the Birds to win 12 and win the division. Now we're getting a little crazy over there, Nick. 12's a lot. I mean, a 17-game season to win 12 games, it's a big year. To go 12-5 is pretty, that would be a huge turnaround. I think that's a little bit more aggressive than I'm ready to go. But I said when the schedule came out, or even before the schedule came out, just when I saw the opponents on the schedule, that the Eagles are probably at the ceiling for me. I could go 10-win team. That's my ceiling. I would say a 10-win team is my ceiling. And I think a 10-7 team, which sounds very bizarre, 10-7. I think a 10-17 is likely a playoff team, especially in the NFC East. 609-403-0973. Keep the text messages coming. If you're watching the show live in the video stream, we will continue to post those and read those off as well. One of the things with Kerrigan, too, you have Brandon Graham, you have Kerrigan, you have Eric Wilson. Don't discount Eric Wilson either. Eric Wilson is a guy who had 3 sacks last year. So we talked about before not having good blitzers. I think these are guys who, I don't want to say are top-level blitzers, but are guys who are used to blitzing more. Wilson is a guy, 3 sacks. Kerrigan, certainly a guy who we've seen come off the edge. So you're going to see the Eagles get to the quarterback in different ways than just depending on the defensive front like Jim Schwartz did. And I know a lot of people did not like Jim Schwartz. I was not a big Jim Schwartz hater by any stretch of the imagination. They got to the quarterback a lot, and that was kind of, one of the things they did was they did it just one way. They didn't do it multi-dimensional. I think now you're looking at a defense that's probably going to be a little bit more multi-dimensional at getting to the quarterback. So I like this deal, and I like it for 2 reasons. It adds more depth, 1, but 2, it gives them a nice veteran teacher in there for some of these younger players. And look, Ryan Kerrigan is a guy who has tortured this team for a while. Now you get to kind of learn from him. By the way, some news on Zach Ertz coming up on the Sports Pass Live on 97.3 ESPN. Keep the comments coming. Good show. Always better when you're a part of it. And coming up, Mike McGarry is going to join me. We'll talk a little bit about this Eagles deal. We'll get his thoughts on now the NBA playoffs. And the Phillies had a disastrous weekend. That's all still to come. Call Jenkins for heating and air conditioning installation service and maintenance, plumbing, or drain cleaning service. 609-641-6440 or JenkinsPlumbingHeating.com. Mike McGarry from the Press of Atlantic City. He joins me for our Monday, Wednesday conversation coming up next. All right, busy day on a Monday. Mike McGarry from the Press of Atlantic City. As people have been enjoying our spats. We haven't spat too much until the playoffs begin. When the NBA gets here, we will probably mix it up a little bit more. We don't know the Sixers' opponent. We'll get into some NBA playoffs. But first, there he is, Mike McGarry from the Press of Atlantic City, as he joins us on the Boardwalk Honda hotline. And if you're watching the live video, I'm imagining, Mike, you were heading to Linwood.
I am. I'm headed to Linwood, Mainland, and Cherokee in a Diamond Classic quarterfinal. Chase Petty supposed to be on the mound for the Mainland Mustangs today. So if you are in the area and you want to see a potential first-round draft pick pitch, he will be throwing today at 4 p.m. against Cherokee. Yeah,
this is a rematch from their Coaches versus Cancer. They played in that first Friday night game, did they not?
Right, and a game that I believe Mainland, Petty did not pitch that game. Mainland rallied. I think they won 6-5. I think they Joe Sheeran with a big hit, as I recall. Mainland rallied to get, so it is a rematch. And Cherokee, a very good baseball program, traditional Group 4 power against Mainland, Group 3 team. That's the kind of matchups you get in the Diamond Classic, teams that don't ordinarily play or face each other. So it should be a good one in Linwood today.
At AC Press McGarry. If you can't make the game and you want some updates, he'll be tweeting those out. And, of course, coverage in tomorrow's Press of Atlantic City. All right, Mike, couple things I want to go back and forth with you on. One, the Eagles signed Ryan Kerrigan today. Now, he has terrorized the NFC East. 13.5 sacks against the Eagles, 13.5 sacks against Dallas, and 13 against the Giants. Does this move the needle for you at all?
Not really. Better, does it make them better? Yes. But quite frankly, I've been sort of stunned by people's optimism about the Eagles after the schedule came out. People playing the schedule game. I read somewhere where the Eagles can get double-digit wins. When I look at that schedule, I honestly have a hard time getting them to 4 or 5 wins, basically. So, okay, this guy they add is good. He plays well in the division. All that's great. But he's a defensive lineman. Okay, maybe he's worth one more win, but I don't understand the overall optimism that I'm seeing from a lot of Eagles fans and some Eagles media after that schedule came out.
Well, it's almost one of those things too. Is like, does this signing what kind of message does it send? Because a lot of people thought this team was kind of rebuilding. Then they go out and get a couple veteran players, Anthony Harris, Eric Wilson, and now you're going to get Kerrigan. Like, what's the message of bringing in a guy like this? Is this saying, no, we think we're in this thing, we think we can win this division?
Well, the message might be, we're trying to rebuild, but we're going to try to win at the same time. I've watched the Giants and the Washington football team try to do that the past 5 years, and it really hasn't worked for either one of those teams. So I think you have to be all in one way or the other. And I think the Eagles right now are kind of, trying to have their cake and eat it too, saying we're going to rebuild, but yet we're going to be competitive. And I don't know if that really works in the NFL.
It's funny because a lot of people are comparing this signing to the Chris Long deal. 32 years old, rotational pass rusher. In fact, Torrey Smith put the meme out of the two Spider-Men pointing at each other, like Chris Long, Ryan Kerrigan. So I don't know. People are looking at this as, hey, remember in 2017, they had all those under the radar, LeGarrette Blount, Chris Long, Patrick Robinson, and those guys all had a big factor. I don't think this team's winning a Super Bowl, but I definitely think they can compete in this division, Mike.
I don't know. Like I said, I looked at the schedule when it came out. I played the schedule game. I'm not a schedule snob. I think the schedule game is fun. Win here, loss here. And I had a tough time getting them to 4 or 5 wins, and this signing isn't putting them over the top. And, you look back at that 2017, okay, Fletcher Cox is 3-4 years older. The overall talent that team had is not what this team has, basically. So, I think Eagles fans are kind of kidding themselves if they think 2021 is going to be a repeat of 2017, basically. I think you're more likely for 2021 to be a repeat of 2020.
All right, Mike McGarry from the Press of Atlantic City. Let's go to the Sixers, who we now know captured that 1 seed. The last time we talked, they had lost to the Heat on Thursday night, and people were a little uneasy about this, but they played good Friday, took care of Orlando, and then won again last night. But they also got some interesting news along the way, is that they're not going to face Miami, Milwaukee, or Brooklyn en route to an Eastern Conference final. So is this the best path they could have hoped for?
Yeah, obviously it's a great path for them. And one thing I don't understand, or I don't get, I kind of tweeted this out last night, and listening to Doc Rivers on Friday night and listening again to some people around the Sixers talk, some media talk, I don't understand this narrative that the Sixers are some sort of young basketball team, going to look to mature in the playoffs. Joel Embiid is 27. Okay, Simmons is 24. Tobias Harris has been in the league 11 years. Danny Green's 33. Seth Curry's 30. George Hill's a veteran. Dwight Howard's 35. This is a team on its 4th straight playoff appearance. 2 years ago, they were in Game 7 against the team that went on to win the NBA championship. This is a team that's built to win right now. I don't buy this narrative coming from Doc Rivers and the Sixers that we've got to get the number 1 seed because we're so young. They're not young. It's time to win. And if they don't win, I still think the Brooklyn Nets are going to win the East, but I think there's a very real case to be made here. If the Sixers don't get to the NBA final as the number 1 seed, the season has been a disappointment. There's no two ways about it.
That's an interesting one. I agree with you that this isn't a young roster anymore. This is a prime roster. The only young guy in terms of age is Simmons, but he's been in the league long enough now. So I agree with you there, but I would say and challenge you on this. When this season began, people thought this was a 6 seed.
Not me. I mean, I think in Embiid, you've got one of the best players in the NBA in his prime right now.
Oh, we found that out after the fact. He has been a much better Embiid this year. And look, he was a great player before. He's turned into an elite player now.
Well, and you've got better shooters around him. It's supposed to emphasize what is good for Embiid and Simmons. You've got Daryl Morey taking over the team. You've got a new coach in Glenn Doc Rivers. To me, this is a team built to win right now right now. Of course of Embiid, he's 27. We don't know how much, is he? I don't think Embiid's going to be Kareem Abdul-Jabbar running up and down the court when he's 37, 38 years old. So Embiid is in his prime. You have the number 1 seed. You have a tailor-made road to the Eastern Conference Finals. Okay.
Agree.
Brooklyn, Miami, Milwaukee on the other side. If the Sixers don't get it done this year, it's a disappointment. And I think they're trying to manage some expectations now with this. We're young. You're not young. It's time to win, and it's time to win right now.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I feel like you have Joel Embiid playing at an MVP level. And when you have that type of player, these are your chances. They have to go and get this. Now, 7 years ago, when they embarked on this, they did this to get a player like Joel Embiid, and they got him. So I agree with you. They're the 1 seed. I would say if they make the Eastern Conference Finals and lose to Brooklyn, I don't know that there's shame in that, right?
Well, I think it depends on how they lose to Brooklyn. If they get to the East Finals and Brooklyn or Milwaukee's there, I think it's going to be Brooklyn, and they lose in 5 games or they lose in 4 games, then I think it's a disappointment. If they lose a classic 7-game series and Durant hits, a game-winning shot in Game 7, he's this Kawhi Leonard. The ball hits the rim 5 times this year instead of 4 back in 2017. Then I think you can walk away and say, okay, we just got beat. But I think it matters how you play in that Eastern Conference Final. And if you were before that, then you have to rethink things, basically.
All right. That's fair. I mean, yeah, if you get swept out and you just look like you're miles away from the 2 seed, then I would agree. But I think for the most part, for them to get the number 1 seed was a surprise for most people coming off of, last year, Mike, it looked clearly like the arrow was plummeting down and this thing was a disaster. They were the butt of a lot of jokes that you did this whole process and you're getting knocked out. You're swept in the first round. They look like they had that Horford contract around their neck for years and that this was going to be, but now you looked at it, we talked about the other day, Boston's the one that's going down and Philly's at the top of the conference. So how long can they sustain this with this as you're saying, age of this roster. Danny Green's probably not going to be here. How long is Curry going to be here? So I think, and Dwight Howard, people forget he's 35. I think this team has a shot right now that you're right. They got to go. I hate to say this with you, but you're right. They got to grab this opportunity because there's no clear-cut favorite.
I would agree, and I just think the other key thing is Embiid's age. He's 27 years old. He had the best season of his career. Give the Sixers credit. You're right. They were headed in the wrong direction after the bubble last year, but they went out and made changes. They brought in Doc Rivers, who I think we can say now is an upgrade over Brett Brown as coach. They went and got Daryl Morey. You're right. We thought the Horford contract, they'll never get rid of that contract. Morey comes in. 2 weeks later, he makes a trade. Horford and Richardson are out. Curry and Green are in. Better fit for the team. They made the changes. They're the number 1 seed. It's time to win now. This is not, this is a win now team. This is not a team, and I'm not saying life falls apart if this is their only window, but they are not on the innocent climb here. They have a legitimate chance to get to the NBA final, and they've got to seize it. And I don't buy the narrative that Doc Rivers is selling, that they're just some sort of young team stumbling into the playoffs, lucky to be there.
It's weird because, when they first made the playoffs a couple of years ago, it felt that people thought that team was ready. That was a young team and probably exceeded expectations. But it's weird because they never really got out of that second round. And then last year, they lose the way they do. It just felt like, man, this thing is falling apart. It's kind of going away. And then you're here. So it is a kind of a weird I guess they took a weird direction to get to the number 1 seed.
Right. Well, it's almost 2 steps up and a big giant step back before they step forward again here. But I would agree with you. 4 years ago, when they made the playoffs, they entered on that big winning streak. They beat, Miami in the first round, and then they go out and lose to the Celtics. That's the sort of innocent climb. The next year, they're right there with Toronto. They beat the Nets. They go 7 games with Toronto. Toronto wins the NBA championship. We would have thought they would have taken a step last year. COVID hits. Who knows? No Ben Simmons in the playoffs. They change over this year. They're the number 1 seed. I mean, again, I just think they're built to win this year. And if they don't win, it's a disappointment.
All right, Mike McGarry covers it all for the Press of Atlantic City. Check out his must-win column, and he joins us here on the Sports Bash. All right, the Knicks and the Hawks. So on Friday, we didn't know if we were going to get that series. In fact, I think you said that the Heat would get that seed. Yeah, the Knicks end up winning both those games. So give them credit. They got the 4 seed. So they're going to host the Hawks in round 1. How do you see that one?
I see it as a long series, and my heart says Knicks. My head, however, says Atlanta has more talent. So I see it as a 6 or 7 game series. My heart, again, says Knicks, Julius Randle, Thibodeau, everything else, Derrick Rose. But my head says Trae Young and the Atlanta Hawks just have a more talented roster than the New York Knicks at this point, basically.
What a story, both those teams. I mean, the Hawks fire their coach in the middle of the season and end up getting a 5 seed after I can't remember. The last time the Hawks made the play what, Al Horford?
Yeah, a couple of years ago, didn't they have that 50-win team that had kind of played well? I think the guy who coaches Milwaukee now was kind of coaching them back then. But I just think there was a game played a couple of weeks ago between the Knicks and the Hawks. The Knicks won in overtime, but the Hawks were pretty much handling the Knicks until Trae Young left with an ankle injury in the third quarter. I think if Trae Young is healthy, I think Trae Young and Capella, especially some size in front, I think the Hawks are tough. So, again, my heart says Knicks, my head says Hawks.
All right, and then we got Heat. Bucks have to match up in the first round. This one, so one of these 2 teams is going to be gone.
Yeah, I think there's temptation there because I believe the Heat beat the Bucks last year, but I think the Bucks win this series. I like the addition of Drew Holiday. I think he brings a toughness to Milwaukee that they didn't have last year. So I actually think Milwaukee wins this series.
All right, Mike McGarry from the Press of Atlantic City. We'll leave and get your thoughts on what happened in Dunedin this weekend. Joe Girardi, Gene Segura, the Phillies can't make Little League plays. I mean, this thing, the optics, he's fighting Jimmy Salisbury. What's going on?
It was not a good weekend for the Philadelphia Phillies, basically. However, I do think it's worth to take a step back and say, hey, They were only a half game back of the New York Mets, who had a very similar weekend as to the Phillies. They were also in Florida. They got swept by the Tampa Bay Rays. They're going to see Geoff McNeil and Michael Conforto probably on the disabled list with hamstring injuries. They were down to one bench player yesterday. The thing about the Phillies, I think, though, that the first 41 games of the season have highlighted, and I still think they're going to be a team that wins between 80 and 84 games and is in contention for that wild card spot. But they just have some problems on the roster, right? They're a poor defensive team. The back of their starting rotation is not good. And they're kind of top heavy with a roster. They lack organizational depth. And I don't know if those problems can be fixed this season. And they were all highlighted this weekend.
At AC Press McGarry from the Press of Atlantic City, Mike McGarry. Don't forget, he'll be over at the mainland game today, Chase Petty in the Diamond Classic. So if you want updates on that, follow him at AC Press McGarry on Twitter. All right, Mike, we'll talk to you later.
All right, we'll see you down the road, Mike. Thanks.
He's, like all guests, appeared via the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Great job, as always. His column, Must Win, in the Press of Atlantic City. Check him out, Mike McGarry, here on the Sports Bash. Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN. Next hour, we'll get deeper into the Sixers' past possible playoff matchups and how that all kind of works. Plus, Terrell Owens, wait till you hear what he has to say about the NFC East this year. We have that coming up as well. Your comments, your questions, your post, 609-403-0973, 609-403-0973. This is the Sports Bash Live on 97.3 ESPN. I got Do You Remember coming up. That includes a lot of Phillies runs, like a lot of them, a lot. Like more runs than they scored all week, it feels like. Do you remember that? All right, we'll get into the Phillies. I'm going to get into the Sixers and why this number one seed exceeds all expectations. It's coming up next here on the Sports Bash, 97.3 ESPN, and the free mobile app powered by First Bank of Sea Isle. All right, hour 2 here with you, Mike Gill, and the Sports Bash, 97.3 ESPN, the free mobile app, where you can download the app, powered by First Bank of Seattle. They do a great job with all the content, Eagles, Sixers, Phillies, Flyers, South Jersey High School sports. Mike, Phillies need to take the L and give up on Scott Kingery. He's hideous. He's batting .053. Yeah, I would agree. The Kingery experiment, and this is on the Phillies. They ruined this kid, but they can't keep trotting him back out there. He is certainly in over his head. It's a shame because they ruined him. They absolutely ruined the kid. They wanted him to be something he's not, and they ruined him. He has the look in his face of a man who has been defeated. So, yes, I do agree that it's time for the Phillies to just move on from Kingery. I thought they did him a disservice by bringing him up again this time after they sent him down. Hey, go down, go get some confidence. The guy hits a game-winning triple to win the game the other night, and then the next night the Phillies bring him right back up. And it's, they have no organizational depth. That's part of the problem. They don't have any organizational depth. He's a guy who has major league experience, and they're paying him a lot. So it's, hey, we got how many guys are hurt right now for this team? So there you go. I will get into the Philly stuff in just a little bit. I got a good conversation. Bob Wankel is going to join me at 4:40 today, as he does every Monday and Friday, to kind of look back at the Phillies weekend, and we look ahead to the weekend with Bob. And Bob, we'll ask him about what happened with Segura and all this stuff, but the organizational, the lack of depth, all of that stuff. But I want to go with the Sixers and the number 1 seed and why this is a big situation. And I agree with what Mike said. They're not a young team. This is a team that has Danny Green, a championship pedigree. This is a team that has Joel Embiid playing at an MVP level. While I'm not saying they are the definitive favorites to win the NBA Eastern Conference and get to a title, and if they get to a title, who stands in the way? Who knows? Maybe the Lakers, maybe the Clippers, maybe the Jazz, maybe Phoenix, maybe Denver. Portland, I don't know. Whoever it is. There is no definitive favorite to win this thing. Right now, if you are betting and you just said who is going to win the title, Brooklyn is the favorite. The Lakers are 4-1. Clippers are 6-1. Jazz are 17-1. And Philadelphia is 15-2. So they are a top 5 team to win the NBA title this year. And as I've said many times, there's only 5 teams that I think can win it, and it's Brooklyn, LA, Philadelphia, and Milwaukee. I don't think Utah is ready to win a championship. I don't think Phoenix is ready to win a championship. I don't think Denver's ready to win a championship. Miami, Dallas, Portland, Golden State. No, I don't think those teams win championships this year. I think it's Brooklyn, LA, and Philadelphia and Milwaukee. They're the teams. Now, what the Clippers did this weekend, by the way, we talked about it with Mike on Friday's show, McGarry, and he said NBA teams and pro teams don't care who they're playing. Well, that didn't play to be true because the Clippers didn't want any part of the Lakers. That was evident. They lost to the freaking Rockets, and they lost to the Oklahoma City Thunder. Those two teams had lost like 48 out of the last 50 games combined, and the Clippers lost to both of them just to get out of playing the Los Angeles Lakers. But I want to talk about the Sixers getting this number 1 seed. So many people, it has been discussed ad nauseum, the process and what they did. And then yesterday I was doing Billy's show, The Locker Room, with him. I was jumping on co-hosting with him yesterday because he was a big anti-process guy, and he was asking me, and I said, look, for me, the process has already been a grand slam home run. Okay, they got Joel Embiid. That's what it set out to do. Now, for some people, if they don't win a title, it's a failure, and that to me is just the expectation is way too high. You can't do something and then the only way that it is deemed successful is to claim the ultimate prize. There are tiers of things that can happen that have levels of success. The level of success that this team has in just 7 seasons after being a 10-win team, which I don't even think it was 7 seasons ago. I think that was about 5 seasons ago that they won 10 games. They didn't win 10 games in the first year. They won 18, then 19, then 10, or 19 and 18 and 10, or whatever it was. It wasn't more than like 5 years ago that the Sixers won 10 freaking games. And you had jackasses telling you you're turning your back on the fans and this is bad basketball and it's embarrassing and the fans will never come back. I mean, those people sound like absolute idiots. This team is the number 1 seed 5 years after losing 72 games. 5 seasons ago, they won 10 games, and now they're the number 1 seed. This thing has been a grand slam home run, bases loaded, bottom of the 9th, and game 7 of the World Series. The only thing better would be to win a championship. Now, being the number 1 seed, that is not what this was all about. What this was about was bringing this franchise back to where you care about this team every single day of the week. And for them to win 10 games 5 years ago and now be the number 1 seed just 5 seasons later, people talk about, oh, you're turning your back on the fans. What fans are you turning your back on? You brought more fans out than you ever knew you had. The Sixers fan base is bigger now than it's ever been, ever. Those people didn't have a clue then, and they don't have a clue now, and they're the same people who are going to tell you, oh, they got to win a championship now. They don't have to win a championship to fulfill the process. Of course, the team had to come out and say, we are doing this to win championships. Everything is about trying to win a championship. There's no guarantee in winning a championship. What this team has done is almost a miracle to get people to care about them at the level they do. Whether you believe it or not, or whether you realize it or not, this team, think about this, they haven't been the number 1 seed in 20 years. 20 years they haven't been the number 1 seed. They haven't won a title since 1983. So whatever they were doing wasn't working. Now, after Allen Iverson got traded, ask yourself this. How much did I care about the Philadelphia 76ers in the post-Iverson era? You know, when he got traded in 06? Think about from 2006 to 2013, how little you cared about the Philadelphia 76ers. And now ask yourself how ready you are for these playoffs to start and how excited you are by getting to watch Joel Embiid play not every single night. He does miss a lot of games because of injury, but you know what I mean. I kid. It is a pretty fascinating accomplishment when you think about it. It really is. And it is one that, again, I think the team hit a grand slam home run. When they made this decision, hey, we're going to lose for a couple of years. They lost for 2.5 seasons. You know, they made the decision in 2013. They went with basically the holdovers from Doug Collins' roster. Evan Turner, Spencer Hawes, Thaddeus Young. They drafted Michael Carter-Williams, traded Drew Holiday to get Nerlens Noel. That was the first indication that things are going to be a little different. But they went with a team that people don't want to admit was not a tanking team. It was a bad team. You know why? Because they were already bad. It was already a bad team. They didn't tank. They sucked. They were terrible. So they trade Evan Turner. They trade Spencer Hawes. They trade Thaddeus Young. And then the next year, hey, we're going to strip it down as far to the ground that we can go and start over. So they really start over in 2014 is when they really ripped it all the way to the ground. They lose in 2014. They win 18 games. And then the next year they hit rock bottom. They win 10 games. The season after that, they won 28 games, and Joel Embiid gets hurt. If he doesn't get hurt, for God's sakes, they might have been the 8th seed that year. So people acted like it took them 10 years. Oh, my God, it took them forever. They lost for 2 seasons. And for God's sakes, who even remembers any of those seasons? Are you literally sitting around the dinner table like, oh, my God, how painful was it when they won 10? Do you even remember? In the world we live in today, we can't even remember what happened yesterday. Yet we're going to sit here and pontificate about the fact that they won 10 games 5 years ago? Would you have felt any better if they won 38 games that year? Of course not. You would have bitched and moaned and complained about, oh, they only won 38 games. This team, I can't. That's the whole point. You didn't care about them for 20 years. 20 years, you didn't give a rat's raccoon about this team. And now all of a sudden, they're the number 1 seed. And you care as much as you do on a night-to-night basis. I mean, literally, a Sixer reaction on social media every night of the week is almost like a freaking Eagles game. Right? People react to the Sixers games like an Eagles Sunday. You don't see people going off like this about a Phillies game. You don't see people going off about the Sixers 10 years ago. Nobody cared. Nobody cared. It's amazing to me that this isn't applauded more and more and more. And look, they might get knocked out I don't know that they're going to get knocked out in the first round. I doubt they'll get knocked out in the second round. I think they're going to be pretty heavy favorites against whoever they play in round 1. Round 2 is going to be tricky. That Atlanta team's kind of sneaky. They've been banged up a lot this year, so we haven't really got a chance to see a full Atlanta team all that much. They shoot the ball. They can score. But I think, the Sixers just have a little too much for them. The Knicks are a scrappy bunch. I think Philly beats the Knicks in round 2. You get to the Eastern Conference Finals. See what happens. I mean, this Brooklyn team has played very little together. I think Brooklyn enters that series as a favorite, no question. But for anybody to sit here after last year, as Rodney says, getting swept last year, I thought the Sixers blew their chance to ever be a top team. Now they're the 1 seed and hit on 3 draft picks, all with potential to be rotation players with Maxey a starter. That's another good point, Rodney, is they've actually got young players. For a team that is the 1 seed and has been a playoff team the last couple of years, they've done a great job at finding young players. Maxey, Thibault, I think the kid Reed can play. I think the kid Joe can shoot it. Those guys are rotational pieces. They might be like Isaiah Joe might eventually be the guy that replaces Furkan Korkmaz, but you need that guy in an 82-game season. So for them, what they have done is, and all the, right, Jalen, that's a good point. All these people out there that said that Embiid and Simmons couldn't play together. I mean, I don't know what they watch. I don't know how much people understand basketball that much. A lot of people think they like basketball, and that's nice. It could be your favorite sport, and you can like it and consume a lot of it. That doesn't mean you understand the intricacies of the game all that much. And people who say Embiid and Simmons couldn't play, I don't know what to tell you. I'm sorry. I mean, obviously, all the numbers across the board say exactly otherwise, that they had one of the highest efficiency ratings together on the court just a couple of years ago. I think the other pieces around them is their problem. It's not those two can't play together. It's that they couldn't put a roster around those two guys. Mike, the process has been a success. You got Joel Embiid, but to say a grand slam is ridiculous. Let's be real. The only teams the Sixers have beaten in the playoffs with Embiid is a very average Heat and Nets team. That's it. So you're reading into it again as victories. It's not about who they've won and how deep in the playoff they've got. It's about the fact that this team was DOA. Nobody cared. No pulse. Apathy. Yeah, they need to be a better team in terms of the success on the court. That's evident. But even without that, people care about this team because they have Joel Embiid. That's the grand slam. The process was about finding a franchise player. You have to have one. If you don't have one, you're bupkis. You're irrelevant in this league. They have one. That's why it's a grand slam. Hey, if they won 60 games and made the Eastern Conference Final a la Boston, but didn't have Joel Embiid, nobody believes in you. Heck, people don't even believe in Boston, and they have Jason Tatum on their team. Tatum's not the best player on a team that wins a title. You have to have that player. If you don't have that player, you're just spinning your wheels, man. And that's why it's a grand slam home run. The Sixers have that player. But for how long? Will you get these top-level seasons out of Joel? That remains to be seen. We'll ask Paul Hudrick coming up. All right, Sixers earned the 1 seed in the East, but who will they play? Well, that we don't know. We'll get our first crack of finding out tomorrow night. The Eastern Conference play-in games begin, and you can hear them all on 97.3 ESPN. Paul Hudrick is here from 97.3ESPN.com, is coming in for a landing podcast. All the Sixers news you need right now here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline with 97.3 ESPN.com Sixers insider Paul Hudrick. Here he is on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline on a Monday. What's going on, Paul?
Just living the dream, Mike. You know me, man.
Yeah, man. Well, hey, Friday night they took care of business. Sunday they didn't have to play anybody. There was a little panic on Thursday after they lost to the Heat. Now you know you won't have to face the Heat or the Bucks. One of those two teams will be gone. So how do you think the weekend in general kind of played out perfectly for the Sixers, right?
Yeah, for sure. And Mike, I think if you've been following along, we all felt this. Like the Orlando Magic, the Sixers beat them yesterday with the Bluecoats, Bluecoats plus Tyrese Maxey yesterday. So I mean, it was you kind of saw this coming on Friday. It should have been an easy victory, as we talked about previously. If they had lost both of those games to the Magic, or really one of them, even that would have been a much greater cause for concern than anything that has transpired at any point in this season. But they didn't. They took care of business Friday. They did what they had to do. They blew a bad team out. And then Sunday was just fun. It was just fun to watch somebody, Maxey's rookie season, man. It is funny to think about. I saw the stat that I think only him, LaMelo Ball, and Anthony Edwards were the only rookies with like multiple 30-point games this season. And it's crazy to think about how good maybe he would be on a bad team. Like how many, what kind of numbers would he have put up if he was playing on a bad team all season long? And the fact that he could be a possible rotation play, maybe not rotation, but I think it's pretty likely that he will see playoff minutes at some point. So I think it's just, you're glad to see Friday. They took care of business. They did what they had to do. And then, like I said, Sunday was just fun to see the young guys. And the other thing, Mike, and I tweeted this out, and everyone kind of hopped all over it. They really crushed the draft this year. To get Maxey, Isaiah Joe, and Paul Reed, 3 guys that I think, as of now, have to factor into the future. That's a pretty damn good haul.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that because I just got done talking about that, how this is a team that perpetually lost purposefully. I say they hit a grand slam home run without winning a championship. If they win a championship, you can't predict that. This process was about finding a MVP player. You have to have that guy. If they win, that's cherry on top. But what they set out to do was to get a player that, like Joel Embiid, that could be the MVP of the league that you can win a title with. But that being said, as a team that has been in the playoffs and been a 50-win team and had some success, they have been able to stock their roster with some nice role players. I said, like maybe Isaiah Joe replaces Furkan Korkmaz at one point. But you need those players through an 82-game season. And Maxey's an interesting one because if I'm Doc Rivers and I'm watching what he does, I'm thinking to myself, do I have to find a way to get him on the court in these playoffs?
Yeah, I mean, when you look at Joe and Paul Reed, it's like, the future. But for Tyrese Maxey, the future might be a week from now. He might help them out. To me, I don't know that Doc Rivers is thinking this way. I have no idea where Doc Rivers is going to go with the rotation. We've talked about that before, that I have no clue in which direction he's going to go. But this kid just it's a skill set that they haven't had at any point during the Joel Embiid, Ben Simmons era. It's a skill set that no one on this current roster other than Tyrese Maxey has, and it's just that ability to take people off the dribble and get to the rim. That's something that it's a big element that has been missing from this offense for years, and he provides it. So if I'm Doc Rivers, I absolutely would be tempted to play him. Because here's the other thing too, Mike. As the season has gone on, he's gotten better with the 3 ball. Listen, he's not elite, but he's gotten better with the 3 balls as the season's gone on.
He was 3 or 4 yesterday.
Exactly. And I think if you look over the last month or so, he's above league average. So I mean, he has hit them pretty well. And then defensively, he's not a liability. He's pretty darn good, actually. Again, all things considered, as a 20-year-old rookie, like if I'm being honest, do I trust him or Furkan Korkmaz defensively? I trust Maxey more because Maxey has the athleticism and the length and the lateral quickness to hang with some of these guys. So if I were Doc Rivers, I would be really, really tempted to play this kid. And the other issue is the roster is just kind of – they're actually – pretty good at guard. You know what I mean? I mean, they have, Danny Green and Seth Kerr in the starting lineup. You have a George Hill now. You have Shake Milton. You have Matisse Thybulle who's like, guard forward. You have Korkmaz. So you have all these other guys. So it's also just tough because of the competition. On a lesser playoff team even, he might have a chance. But, Mike, I look at, too, like last year, Tyler Hero came out of nowhere. 20-year-old rookie out of Kentucky, picking the teens. No one expected him to make the impact he did on a team that went to the finals. So you never know. I think that Maxey will get a chance. He'll play at some point, but I don't know how long. But if I were Doc Rivers, I would be very tempted to keep him around.
I just wrote down here because sometimes I have questions that pop in my head then I forget. But playing time at the expense of who, though? If Maxey's getting more minutes and you're saying, hey, they got to find him time at the expense of who?
Well, so as we kind of touched on the starting lineup, I mean, you have three guys that are going to be playing big minutes with Embiid, with Simmons, and Harris. So that's it, right? I mean, that's a big chunk of it. And Simmons is he is, Doc Rivers doesn't want to call him that. He's the point guard. Let's just get that out there. He is the point guard of this team. So that's that's 38 minutes of essentially one position there. You have George Hill. You didn't trade for George Hill to have him sit on the bench. You traded for George Hill because you liked him as a veteran presence, as his defense, and I think that's why you could listen. I understand an argument if you want to make it possibly for Maxey over Shake Milton, but what I would say with Shake Milton is the shot. Shake Milton's been over 40% since in the second half of the season, and he's a proven commodity as a shooter throughout his NBA career. And defensively, as much as I just praised Maxey's defense, I trust Shake Milton more defensively with the concepts. Just knowing where he needs to be and handling more veteran kind of offensive players. And he's bigger. He's 6'6", he's got long arms. So I would say that would maybe be your debate, would be Maxey versus Milton. But that would probably be where it ends, is the fact defensively, I think Milton just gives you more, and he just spreads the floor better. Because, yes, Maxey's improved, but he's not quite there with the shot where he's spacing the floor appropriately when Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid out there, or when Dwight Howard's out there with the second unit.
Paul Hudrick's with us at Paul Hudrick on Twitter. Is this team in win now? Like, they have to win? Like, is the window like, hey, it's here. We got to do this. I mean, Danny Green's not going to be here probably. Dwight Howard's 35. He's probably been the best backup that they've had for Joel Embiid. It's been a very sore spot for them over the last couple of years. Does this season feel like, hey, this is your one shot with this roster to do it? Because after this, I don't know if Dwight Howard's future is going to be. I don't know what Danny Green's future is going to be. But does this feel like if you don't do it this year, it's a disappointment?
The simple answer is no. And it's kind of some of the stuff we've already touched on. The one thing is the whole thing with the process, like you talked about. The idea was not just to get a championship. The idea was to get superstars, was to get young MVP, high-level all-star type of players. The Sixers have done that. They got Joel Embiid. They got Ben Simmons. And they're not going anywhere. They're signed. And, I'm sure when Joel Embiid, when that opportunity comes to get the next Supermax, I'm sure they're going to lock him up. And I'm sure he's going to want to stay here. I don't think he's going to want to go anywhere. So you have that. You already have Ben Simmons locked up. You have Tobias Harris locked up. If you have, first of all, just to start, you have those three guys, you got a shot. If you put the right pieces around them, you have a chance to win every single season. And again, that's what the process was about. It was about maintaining a winning team, not just trying to go all in for one season. It was about a team that has, a bunch of bites of the apples. Because like you said too, as well, it's not easy. It is not easy to win. You need to keep coming at it. You need to be consistently good. And in 1 year, you break through. And another thing we touched on, all the young guys they have. You're right. They might lose Danny Green just because, with salary cap and, with the luxury tax, there's a good chance that Danny Green, especially if he plays well in the playoffs, he might get a good offer to go somewhere else and kind of go out of the Sixers price range. Well, guess what? You put Matisse Thybulle in the starting lineup. You let him know this is, offensively, you need to come back. You need to shoot the ball at a high level, not high level, but a decent level. And you need to do things off the ball, and you need to move, you need to make sure you are intact. You have everything coordinated with spacing, and you give him a crack at the starting lineup if you can't retain Danny Green. Dwight Howard's on the minimum this year. I don't see why you couldn't just bring him back for the minimum next year. If not, Paul Reed. Maybe Paul Reed's an option next year because, Doc Rivers said he wasn't quite ready this year, but maybe he's ready next year. Shake Milton's another year older. Tyrese Maxey's another year older. Isaiah Joe, like you said, he could be a factor next year because I think he can shoot the ball at a high level. We all know that, but I think he's better defensively than any of us, including Doc Rivers, even thought he was going to be. He's pretty good. So he's got a legitimate shot to be a 3-and-D wing rotational player next season, I think. So for all those reasons, I don't think it is a win now thing. Of course, they can win now. That would be great. But I think that if they don't win this year, it's not this huge disappointment, because I think next year they're going to have another crack at it.
All right, Paul, do you think this team feels slighted?
Yeah, I think they absolutely do.
They're the number 1 seed.
Yeah.
Nobody talks about them.
Right. And I think that's kind of been their thing all year. You know, Joel Embiid felt slighted because he didn't make any of the All-NBA teams last year. Ben Simmons, of course, feels slighted because all anyone wants to do is talk about his jump shot. Tobias Harris, all-star snub. Seth Curry traded away from the Dallas Mavericks. Danny Green traded away from a team that he just won a championship with. So I think Dwight Howard, you know, it goes on and on and on. All these guys, Tyrese Maxey slipped to 21 in the draft. Just all these players kind of have, I feel like, a chip and something to kind of play for. And I think it's galvanized them a little bit. And I had to it's so funny because I think one thing that I've learned about Doc Rivers is that he will absolutely tell you one thing and then do a completely different thing with his team. Like, I think he talks about a lot about like, we don't scoreboard watch. We're not paying attention to what you guys say, like whatever. I think there is a lot more. And, you know, it came out a little bit in that ESPN article where he said to Ramona Shelburne, he told Joel Embiid, if you ever seen an MVP that's out of shape. So I think he props guys up to us, to the media, to everyone, to the fans. But when it's closed doors, when he's one-on-one with those guys, I think he's not afraid to say what he wants from those guys, what he needs from those guys. So I think that Doc Rivers uses a lot of this, a lot of, hey, Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons, they can't play together. They can't win a championship together. Tobias Harris, that was a terrible trade. He makes way too much money. Like, I am never been more sure of anything in my life. So Doc Rivers uses all those little things and all those little slights to pump guys up and to try to give them a little bit of an edge. And I think that's the way to do it. We all watched The Last Dance and what it took Michael Jordan making stuff up to pump himself up. So I think that's all part of it. I do think they feel slighted, and I think that's part of the reason they won so many games and why they're the number 1 seed.
A couple things. The 4 possible teams they could play: Boston, Washington, Hornets, Pacers. Any of those a greater concern than the other? I mean, I'm sure, you're not as concerned about the Hornets but which team is the one that you're like, that one might be a problem?
I would say Washington, but when I define problem, I don't mean problem as in they have a chance to lose. I define it in as they could win a couple games and make it a tough series, win a game or two, kind of like, reminiscent of maybe that Heat series from a couple of years ago when, the first year that they made the postseason again. And it was a 5-game series. The Sixers took care of business. They were the better team. But a couple of those games, they were knockout, dragout. They were tough games, tough physical games. And I could see a series against the Wizards, Russell Westbrook, the way he's playing, going 100 miles an hour. He's not going to concede anything. He's going to try to win. He doesn't care that they're the 10 seed, 9 seed, 8 seed. None of that matters to him. He just wants to win. And then Bradley Beal, who's Bradley Beal. I mean, we've seen what he's done to the Sixers over the year. The guy's, one of the best scorers in the entire NBA. And so, again, they would win that series, I think, and, probably take care of it in 4 or 5 games. But it would not be easy and it would not be fun. And I think that Westbrook and Beal would stretch their limits a little bit, especially defensively. In a weird way, though, Mike, maybe they need that to kind of get them kick-started, kind of get their juices flowing, kind of get that defensive identity back. But, yeah, that would be the team that if I'm looking at all 4 of those, I think Washington far and away is the team I wouldn't want to play.
Well, yeah, it's Washington, Boston, Charlotte, Indiana. Those games are tomorrow night. The winner is in. They would be the 7 seed. The loser would play the winner of the other game. So the winner of the Wizards-Celtics game, they are the 7 seed. So if Washington beats Boston, they would play Brooklyn in round 1, right? It would be Brooklyn-Washington. Well, they're going to score 160 a night, those 2 teams?
Possibly. I'd be actually – and again, you know what? Kind of going off the same note for the Sixers, if you're Brooklyn, that's not the team you really want to play, especially if there are questions about your defense.
Sure.
Who's guarding Russell Westbrook and Bradley Beal in that series? I mean, that's going to be a fun matchup. Again, Brooklyn will take care of business, but it would be fun to watch.
That would be nuts. I mean, you got Kevin Durant, James Harden, Kyrie Irving, Bradley Beal, and Russell Westbrook all on the
floor. Star
game.
power. Yeah.
Holy mackerel. Wizards, Brooklyn, sign me up for that. And that means Philly would get either Boston, Charlotte, or Indiana. So, obviously you would be a heavy favorite. And then your second round path, the Heat are the 6th seed. They will play Milwaukee in round 1, which means Philly would take on in round 2 either Atlanta or the Knicks. The Knicks are now the home court in that series. So does that give them the slight edge for you?
I would say yes too. And I just think the brand of basketball that the Knicks play, that knockout, drag out 90s era basketball where I think that's the kind of basketball that generally win. Like, when you play it at an elite level, that kind of basketball can win in the playoffs if the talent is close. And I think the talent's close enough that I think that's where I would give the Knicks the slight edge. But I don't want to discount the Hawks either. I mean, Trae Young had, kind of quietly had a phenomenal year. And some of those veteran guys, man, they play tough. They play hard. And so I do think that could be a very tough series. I would give the slight edge to the Knicks just because of the way they play, the style they play, and the level of defense Thibodeau has them playing at.
Let me ask you this, Paul. It's late in the game because I see people texting in already. The Sixers are going to get exposed in the playoffs. Superstars win championships. Guys who can get buckets when the game's on the line. Defenses will take the ball out of the bigs' hands, and you need a wing player that can do it. Is there questions about that? If the team late in the game, it's 2-point game, and you need a bucket, and they're double, triple in Joel Embiid, can the Sixers get that late bucket?
It's certainly a concern. Yeah, absolutely. Tobias Harris has done a really nice job of that all season long. And that's kind of been one of my biggest question marks all season is, will he be able to do that in the playoffs? And when the playoffs hit in the fourth quarter, he's been excellent this year. And he's done it in some big times and some big moments. He did it against the Lakers, hit a big shot to beat them at home. So will he be able to translate that to the playoffs? I think that's a huge part of it. And then, to your point, when Joel Embiid gets double and triple teamed, Joel Embiid has handled those situations much, 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 much better than he has in the past. So can he find a Danny Green wide open in the corner, or Seth Curry on the wing, or Ben Simmons in the dunker spot? Like, can he find those guys for those shots? So I think I'm less concerned about it than maybe I was in the past, but I'm still, it's still a concern because they're going to aggressively take care of Joel Embiid. He's done better at that, but this is still the postseason. It's going to be a different animal.
Well, yeah, that's where the people will, if you're relying on Danny Green and Seth Curry to be your shot makers, is that a recipe for playoff success?
But I mean, guys hit big shots. I mean, John Paxson and Steve Kerr hit 2 of the biggest shots in NBA history. Like, that's just because on a team with Michael Jordan, it's just, that's the way basketball is. Like, you have to have 5 guys that can do stuff. So that's why, yes, having Danny Green and Seth Curry, especially Danny Green, who's hit a ton of big shots in his career, having guys like that where they do overly aggressively double and triple team Joel Embiid, so he has those outlets to do that. Yeah, I mean, that's the correct strategy if you're the opponent. But if you can, that's why those guys are here. That's why Daryl Morey brought them in. They are shooters. They are meant to hit wide open shots. And guys, like I said, throughout history, guys have done that.
Do you think Daryl Morey put this team together this year thinking they were an NBA Finals team? Or is this more like, hey, let me just get rid of these contracts and we'll go on from there, but let me get out from under the contracts first? Or when he did this was, you know what, this is a team that I think can do something? Or is this surprising to them?
I guess the simple answer is I don't think he went in thinking championship or bust. I'm trying to win a championship this year. What I think his main thought was, and this is what I've applauded him for all season long, because I think this is the right way to do it. What do I do to best build around Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons? What do I do to best build around the 2 all-stars and their strengths and weaknesses? And the first solution was they need shooters. You can't have a 6'10" Al Horford playing power forward for you. You can't have Josh Richardson, who is a below average 3-point shooter and who's really not that willing to take 3-pointers. So let's flip those guys and let's turn them into the second best 3-point shooter in NBA history in Seth Curry. And then one of the best corner 3-point shooter right now in the NBA and Danny Green. And so I think that was what the bigger thought was. Let's do that. And then let's see what these guys can do under Doc Rivers with a new coach and with these shooters and with a team that's better suits their needs, how can we go forward? And I think he wanted to take a look at that before it was any kind of sweeping declarations or any kind of grand conclusions that they drew. So that to me has been the focus all along. And I think that's, even if they don't win the championship this year, I still think this offseason it still will be about, what do I do to best complement Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons?
Well, yeah, the fact that Morey's here now for particularly a longer haul, these all-season are going to be very intriguing if they fail to see, okay, we failed. This is why we failed. This is what I'm going to do to fix that. That is just great to have him on your side. Let me ask you this. We'll leave you with this, Paul. And Paul will be back Wednesday, Friday, of course, to take a look closer at some of the matchup possibilities and more Sixers as they get ready for the first seed for the first time in 20 years. How do you envision teams defending Ben Simmons in the playoffs? Differently than we saw for 72 games? Similar? Does the roster around him now prevent teams from kind of sagging off like we've seen in the past? How do you envision teams defending Ben Simmons?
So it's going to be similar. I mean, they're going to put bigger players on him, and they're going to give him space. I mean, that's been kind of the formula that's worked for most teams in defending him. And I think part of the reason I think he is going to be better in the playoffs is because Joel Embiid is better. Because when Joel Embiid gets double teamed, typically Ben Simmons' guy is the guy that's doing it for obvious reasons. So I think Ben Simmons has gotten better as a cutter and knowing his and where to be and how to get there. And I think Joel Embiid has done better at finding him, seeing him come open and kind of manipulating the defenses that way. And I think that's, to me, that's the thing that I'm kind of most encouraged about and where I see the biggest improvement for the Sixers as a team in the playoffs offensively is that Joel Embiid has just gotten so good where he's at a point where not only is he not scared of double teams, he's inviting them and he's ready for them and he's scanning the entire court. And he's almost, I think, the one thing that Drew Hanlon, who is his personal trainer, said in that article, he said he's not prepping to play against a player. He's prepping to play against an entire team. And I think that's been one of the biggest things of his development. And that's one of the biggest reasons why I think Ben Simmons will be better and why I think the Sixers offense will be better as a whole, because Joel Embiid has figured out how to handle those situations better.
That should be interesting. A lot of people feel, all right, they're just going to sag off and they're going to make Ben try to do what he hasn't been able to do in past playoff rounds. So we'll see how teams end up defending him. That'll be a big story. And, of course, how teams defend Joel Embiid, especially later on in games. And can the Sixers use the same formula that they used in the regular season where they won 49 games and became the number one seed in the East? They will play probably Saturday, Paul.
That's what it seems like. We'll see, though. But, yeah, it seems like Saturday would make the most sense.
Yeah, the play-in Eastern Conference games are Tuesday, Thursday. So you'll have an opponent by Thursday night, and you would think that they would play that game on Saturday, maybe Sunday, who knows. But it'll either be Saturday or Sunday. We'll have more details as this week goes on. He is Paul Hudrick, at Paul Hudrick. And, of course, you can read all his Sixers coverage for the NBA playoffs at 97.3ESPN.com. All right, Paul, good stuff, bud.
All right, Mike. Take care, man.
And he, like all guests, appeared via the Boardwalk Honda hotline. We always enjoy talking to Paul Hudrick here on the Sports Bash. And, of course, if you can't get enough Sixers, well, we're back tomorrow with Michael Kasky-Blomain. Talk a little bit about this NBA playoffs. Mitch Lawrence tonight from Sirius XM NBA Radio. Wednesday, Paul is back. Thursday, Keith Smith is here. And Friday, Paul is back. We've got the Sixers covered every day at 3:20 during Inside the Sixers with our team of insiders. Paul Hudrick, Michael Kasky-Blomain does a great job for CBS Sports, and Keith Smith from Yahoo Sports. So we give you the local inside and the national insider perspective of the 76ers. Brought to you by your Delaware Valley Acura dealers. Great deals on Acura's award-winning lineup. Shop online at DelValAcuraDealers.com. All right, so when we come back, the Phillies weekend was a disaster. Are we overreacting? We got that, plus the Eagles with a big signing today. They bring in Ryan Kerrigan. We got the details during Football at 4 with Geoff Mosher. And tonight at 5 o'clock, Mitch Lawrence from Sirius XM NBA Radio is in the house to talk a little bit about these NBA play-in games. It's all coming up today on the Sports Bash. A Monday edition of the Sports Bash, 97.3 ESPN. By the way, it's Josh's birthday today. It's like 25 years old, Josh. You know, when you listen to Greeny's show, when he talks about Hembo being like the oldest 30-something-year-old, he's like he's a 71-year-old, 34-year-old, whatever Hembo is. That would be you, right? you would be the oldest young guy that there is. Probably, right? How old are you really? 36. Wow. Happy birthday. Did you do anything fun this weekend? UFC fights. Okay. Always good when you have. I love when the UFC fight falls on your birthday. I had a big one fall on my birthday this year. You want a little money, eh? That's a nice little birthday present. Sports Bash Live 97.3 ESPN. So if you want to wish Josh a happy birthday, you can text in 609-403-0973. We'll read off some birthday messages. By the way, I got another great email over the weekend that I wanted to read because for whatever reason, there's a lot of nice people out there all of a sudden, Josh. How about this email I want to pull up from another listener? And I read the email last week that I got from a gentleman, and I thought this one was equally as nice. He says, Dear Mr. Gill, this past week you highlighted on the air an email from a listener, Bob. It was a heartfelt response thanking him for the kind words expressed towards both you and your show. I, too, am of the opinion you are at the vanguard of sports radio. As a retired New Jersey high school principal, I now have time to listen and enjoy sports radio. You, sir, orchestrate an excellent presentation each and every weekday. I sincerely mean that, Mike. My biggest concern is that one day a network executive will hire you away from the station. It will be a positive for your future listeners, but a great loss for those of us listening in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, and parts unknown. I wish you continued success in your career, Mike, and I thank you and your staff for their industriousness. I will continue to listen and enjoy your show. You are well respected in my household. Sincerely, Dr. Jim, and I'll keep his name private, but I really appreciate the email. I mean, I'm blown away by something. You know, it's great when the listeners appreciate you and get what you're trying to do. That's not always the case, and a lot of people like to spread their negativity. But again, I'm just absolutely speechless, Dr. Jim, with that kind email. And by the way, he did mention your guests are well-informed and entertaining. Josh, Pete, Andrew, Geoff, Adam, Sal, Dave, etc. Supplement your sports acumen and enthusiasm for each listener. So he did give a nice shout-out to a lot of the team as well. But I wanted to thank Dr. Jim, who's listening in Manville, New Jersey. And I wish I could say I even heard of Manville or knew where it is in Somerset County, New Jersey. I appreciate that, Dr. Jim. I really am blown away by these last couple emails and tweets. I've gotten some very nice ones. Got one earlier today, just earlier today. Somebody texted in. Let me see if I can find that one. Great show, Mike. The Postal Service in South Jersey thanks you for making the day go by quickly and enjoyably. The Kerrigan signing doesn't move the needle too much because I was much like you, in the opinion that if Hurts is protected by a healthy line, this team will score points in bunches. Smith, Rieger, Fulgham in the slot, Goddard, Sanders, and a good running back core is going to be tough to cover. Let's beef up the secondary and score people into believing. I thank you for your text and the great people at the Postal Service in South Jersey. I am very happy that I can be in your ear as you're walking, doing your job each and every day. It is very kind of you and the emailers and the listeners to send me stuff like that because Lord knows we don't get enough of it. If people actually knew what we did every day, Josh, way at the top of that list of stuff that he does that you just wish people had any clue about. But the two of us will continue to do what we can to get emails like that. I sincerely appreciate hearing that type of feedback, and I'm just overwhelmed at the amount of it that's been coming in. So thank you again, Dr. Jim. Football at 4 is coming up next. All right, Football at 4 is powered by the Inside the Birds podcast and brought to you by PropSwap, America's sports betting marketplace. Sell your sports bets and take your profit. Find out how at PropSwap.com or download the PropSwap app today. So a Monday where the Eagles veterans are supposed to be back on the field. Some are, some aren't. Zach Ertz, one of the guys who will not be there. We'll try to find out more details on that. But Geoff Mosher, the Eagles surprised, I think, a lot of people today by making a veteran signing. This wasn't like, hey, let's just try to bring a guy in who can compete for now he probably will have to compete for a job, but what's the message of bringing in a 32-year-old veteran like Ryan Kerrigan, the all-time sack leader from the Washington football team?
Oh, the message is it's the same message, Mike, that the Eagles sent on day 2 of the draft when they drafted an offensive lineman and a defensive lineman, even though cornerback was a bigger glaring need. And Howie Roseman even said, we'll never apologize for continuing to build up and fortify the offensive and defensive lines. The Eagles don't have great defensive end depth prior to the Kerrigan signing. There's Brandon Graham, and then there's Derek Barnett, who has faced a lot of injuries in his career. And then really there's Josh Sweat, who's always been and probably always will be a situational pass rusher, not built to start because of the knees. So imagine I think we've talked about this on this show, and we've talked about it a lot on Inside the Birds. What if Josh Sweat or Brandon Graham or Derek Barnett get hurt? Who are your starting 2 defensive ends? You need somebody who can play. And Kerrigan's obviously had his snaps diminished the last 2 years, and his sacks have gone down, but he's also been kind of a victim of the Washington drafting Montez Sweat and Chase Young back-to-back. I still think there's gas left in the tank, and it's similar to a Chris Long signing. And the Eagles, as we say all the time, say it on Inside the Birds, say it on this show, right? The Eagles are never tanking. They're always trying to compete. They're trying to replenish the roster. No doubt they're not as aggressive this year in free agency because they can't be with their money, but they're always trying to build the best way possible to be able to both win and turn the roster over at the same time.
Right. Now, you mentioned his snaps kind of got diminished, but when he did play, he was still pretty productive. In fact, against the Eagles, he was the defensive player of the week because he was all over the place. Still had 5.5 sacks last year. He played about 40% of the snaps, a little less than that in Washington. Do you see a similar role here? And how do you envision them using him? Is he a down defensive end, in the traditional sense?
It's a great question because we don't really know 100% Jonathan Gannon's scheme. Jim Schwartz rotated defensive linemen. We know that. He rotated them heavily. I don't know how much Jonathan Gannon will rotate. I do know he's going to run a very active front, a lot of looping, a lot of stunting, things that Jim Schwartz actually didn't do a whole lot of. But he's got 4 defensive ends now. I think we can all safely say that it'd be a miracle if all 4 of them played 16 games. So I feel like he's going to be able to use them. I'm just curious to see early on, before injuries settle, what's the rotation look like. But obviously you sign a guy like Kerrigan, you're going to use him. He's going to be on the field. The question is, does he just, as you mentioned, does he stand up? Does he put his hand in the dirt? Do they move him around at all? Can't wait to see how Jonathan Gannon uses his defense and his personnel.
Yeah, and Kerrigan's one because, some places you'll see him listed as an outside linebacker. Pro Football Reference lists Kerrigan as a outside linebacker. They list him as a defensive end earlier in his career. So he's kind of been, all over the field as a stand-up edge rusher, hand in the dirt, edge rusher. I mean, a lot of it is this is a legit pass rushing guy who can get to the quarterback, and it'll be very interesting to see because there are some people who wonder, well, is this a precursor to switch into a 3-4 look?
No, I don't think that at all. I think for most of his career, he's been a defensive end, a guy who's rushed from a hand in the dirt standpoint. It's not until I think Jack Del Rio and Ron Rivera took over last year. Is that their first year? Yeah, I think that was their first year, right? That they changed to a 3-4 kind of look. But, everybody's multiple these days. Everybody does. Even when the Eagles have – Derek Barnett does a lot of stand-up rushing. Chris Long came in here, who this signing has been related to, and did a lot of stand-up rushing. And, Chris probably had to play more than people thought at one point because of injuries while he was here at defensive end, and he played well. And perhaps that'll be a case for Ryan Kerrigan. I'm interested to see what the money is. It's only a 1-year deal. Doesn't mean they didn't do the whole thing where they add dummy years and stretch some of the money out. But I don't see any downside to it. I think he adds and he helps make this team try to compete.
Yeah, no. You mentioned, of course, as many, even Torrey Smith. He put the meme of the two Spider-Men pointing at each other and said, Chris Long, 2017, Ryan Kerrigan here. Now, I mean, Long was a very good player, but you can make an argument that Kerrigan's a better player than Long was. I mean, this is the all-time sack leader. And by the way, he's a guy that terrorized the NFC East.
Yeah, I think he has 13 and a half sacks against the Eagles, right? And I thought that probably is his most. And then I looked and he has 13 and a half sacks against Dallas, and I think he has 13 against New York. So he was a pretty equal opportunity wrecker for the NFC East team. So, yeah, I think he's got gas left in the tank, I assume. We'll see. I don't know. You mentioned last year he still was able to play even at a fairly high level at times, even in a rotation, which might be good for him. It might be good to not have to play all those snaps in the game. It's certainly good for the Eagles. It's good for their pass rush. And do they still need a cornerback? Yes. Do I still think they'll sign a cornerback? Yes. And for people why would you sign a defensive end first over a cornerback? Well, all the cornerbacks that are available on the market right now are probably all at the same level. And I don't know that you can say that about pass rushers. I mean, Ryan, I would have to think is one of the most accomplished ones who are still out there on the market. And because he was on the market now, the price tag probably wasn't very high.
I would imagine so. And he tweeted out, hey, I know you probably hated me for the last 10 years, but actually, in one of the articles that I had read, John Keim wrote that he said he felt that he was going to get a good opportunity for playing time here, that they rotate their ends and that should give him the opportunity to play. And if you remember, Geoff, when the Eagles signed Chris Long, he too was 32 years old. And by the way, Brandon Graham is 33 years old. And I don't hear too many Eagle fans thinking that all of a sudden that he's out of gas, because that would not be very good.
No, that would be bad. And the funny thing is that here's the conversation that nobody's really having, but it's probably a fair one. I mean, the guy is a way more accomplished defensive end than Derek Barnett. And, Derek Barnett's never had a year as good as Ryan Kerrigan.
Yeah.
So who's DE number 2 behind Brandon Graham? You gotta think it's going to be Derek Barnett, of course. To
be fair, Mosher, you could make an argument that Kerrigan's more accomplished than Graham
Brandon Graham, yeah, absolutely. That's absolutely true. I don't know if Kerrigan's ever been considered as good of a run defender as Graham, right, but he's certainly been a better pass rusher, statistics wise than Graham usually.
Let's just say, hey, he's got some gas left in the tank. You can see a situation where Graham, Fletcher Cox, Javon Hargrave, and Kerrigan are all on the field at the same time. That's 4 guys that can really get to the quarterback, which has some people saying, man, if they could get a corner who can actually play, it feels like the perception all of a sudden. Do you feel this as well at Inside the Birds? You guys, are you getting feedback from people who were like, there's a little bit more positivity all of a sudden?
Yeah, I laugh because I'm guessing maybe you might have heard, like, a big part of our show this morning that dropped was we were kind of saying what happened, because it feels like last week, once the schedule came out, there was like this surge in public optimism over how good the Eagles can be, as opposed to the first week of January when the season's over and the team's a mess and everybody says there's no way this team can compete in 2021. And I don't know how much has changed other than the signings of your Eric Wilson and Anthony Harris, and of course, the running backs that they've added, and now Ryan Kerrigan, which is good. These are good signings, good value signings. I wouldn't call any of them, like when you signed Javon Hargrave last year. I mean, this is a guy who they really felt was young and ascending and emerging and has Pro Bowl talent. I don't know if any of the signings this year are like that, but they're good placeholder type signings in a draft. But now all of a sudden you have people coming out thinking, you know what? I think the Eagles can win 10 or 11 games. And I'm not going to listen. People are entitled to think what they want. I just want to know what happened from the first week in January to now, so that it was like, we're going to be picking in the top 3 again next year, to now I think we can win the division. That is a surge that is even surprising to me.
Maybe I have more listeners than I thought.
Maybe you do. Are you responsible for this? All right, I'm going to blame you on the next pod.
I have said, Geoff, my take has really been, if the offensive line can stay healthy, I don't see any reason why they shouldn't be competitive in this division, which is very mediocre. And I acknowledge that the talent in the division is better. I think Dallas is going to be better. I think the Giants should be better. I think Washington should be better. So that said, I don't think it's a 7-9 championship division again, but The Eagles' offensive line, if healthy, is the best line out of the 4 teams. And to me, that is the most important because the Eagles certainly didn't have the best skill players in 2017. They had the best line because Minnesota and Atlanta could both say, we have better skill players than you do, but the Eagles won their Super Bowl because they had the best offensive line, and there's no reason if that line's not healthy that they shouldn't be competitive again.
Yeah, it's funny because somebody on Twitter reached out to me and asked me and Adam why we were so negative. And I'm not quite sure why they said that. We didn't say that the team was headed for disaster. And I pointed them to an article I wrote on InsideTheBirds.com in February when things were still pretty bad. And I just noted that offensive, as just like what you said, I'm like, the team is seriously undergoing major change. And I understand pessimism. But if you look, that they're pretty good on the offensive and defensive line still. And when you're good at those, you have a chance to win most games that you're going to be in. Now, then it comes down to, do you get the great quarterback play? Do you get your great playmaker, wide receiver play? Can you force some turnovers? And that's where this team has kind of been deficient over the last year. And so I have no idea. I'm not going to sit here and say there are X amount of wins because you just don't know. And it also is a big if. The whole if staying healthy thing isn't just if. I mean, This is basically the same offensive line from the team that won the Super Bowl, and that was 5 years ago. So these guys are getting old, right? I mean, so it's other than left tackle. So I would say that it's a big if to say these guys are going to stay healthy, but it's very fair to say that if they're healthy on the offensive and defensive lines, the Eagles should be a decent team. I don't think, and that also depends on what you think is decent. Like if you peg me, if you put a gun to my head, I would probably say somewhere between 6 and 8 wins. Okay. I don't think that's being, unrealistic or Negadelphian. That's just what I see.
Yeah, no, and I think that is a very fair. I mean, look, Vegas said 6.5. Now, I would say to flip that, last year Vegas had them winning 10 games. What happened that made them go from 10 to 4? Did they have a 4-win roster and Vegas just bungled it? Or what were the mitigating reasons they went from a preseason 10-win to a postseason 4-win team? I think you had a lot of injuries that led to that. Devonta Smith should be interesting to see how they work him in. But Nick Sirianni said over the weekend, as advertised, and I thought what really wasn't highlighted enough, by people like me and maybe all of us, he catches everything. And this team had such a problem catching the damn football for the last 2 or 3 seasons. To have a guy who's flat out going to catch everything, it was almost like, as advertised, he catches everything. You almost take for granted they're going to catch it, but this team didn't catch it.
No, they don't catch it. Not nearly enough. And look, I know Devonta Smith's size will be a concern for some people, and that's fair. But the one size that you shouldn't be concerned with is he has good hands. He has big, decent wide receiver size hands, and he has long arms. His wingspan is longer than you would think for a guy who's only, I think, 5'11", right, or 6 foot, right, at 6 foot, something like that. So he that's why in college he was actually a fairly good contested catch type of wide receiver and jump ball receiver because he has a good vertical leap as well. So he's got good athleticism. You heard Nick Sirianni talk about separation at the top of the route, very crisp, very fluid. You'll see that. I mean, I think that stuff is going to be the stuff that's really apparent on the field when he's out there.
Do you take any issue? I don't. I'm just throwing that out there that Sirianni again refuses to name Hurts the starter, and he continues to go with competition. That seems to be, look, he's a new coach. That's his theme. I'm all for it.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. New coach setting a tone. That's pretty common among first-year head coaches that they want to come in and preach competition. Big Red did it in '98. He even made an example. We always talk about the George Hegeman story where, guy wanted more money, called the organization out. Next day he's out blocking fighting a blocking sled for the entire practice and then cut afterwards. So guys have to come in and stick to their coaching philosophies and principles. And he's doing that, but he's also has to do that because he's the head coach, not the GM. He's not in charge of personnel. And he can say Jalen Hurts is my starter. And then tomorrow, Howie and Jeffrey and the guys in the front office could decide to make a bombshell move and bring in, I don't know, maybe Aaron Rodgers, or if Deshaun Watson's legal issues all of a sudden disappear and they feel like he's available, they go and get him. So it really doesn't do anybody any good right now. Does it maybe impact Jalen Hurts? Would it help Jalen Hurts to hear it because he's acting right now like QB1? People say that, and maybe, but look, we're going to get our answer in about 2 or 3 weeks when they start mini camp. We'll see who shows up, if he shows up. And if he does, he's going to be the guy taking the first team reps. So what that's going to tell everybody he's the first team quarterback. So it's really much ado about nothing to me.
Today, no Zach Ertz, which is not a surprise, not participating. Phase 2 of the offseason workouts. And apparently he will not be at any of the things here. But when would you, Geoff, think there might be resolve on this Ertz thing? Because he's not going to show up to anything. And that would kind of anticipate that he doesn't think he's going to be here, right?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. It's a good question, Mike, because I believe the Eagles are in that $4 to $5 million in cap space range, and they've got to sign rookies. So you would have to think by June 1st they'll free up some money because of the post June 1 designations. I think on Malik and Alshon, if that's what it was. So some of the money will be freed up. Maybe they'll be able to sign enough that maybe they'll have enough to be able to sign their rookies and still have Zach on the roster, so they don't feel the need to have to just outright release him to clear the $8 million. So we'll see in the next week or two.
If that's the case, though, Geoff, if they can fit him under the cap, are they okay with? Is he okay with just staying here?
No, I don't think he would play under his current contract.
He would sit out.
I tend to think he would. Yeah.
Wow. That's interesting. So he just would say, I'm holding out.
Well, you get into a whole lot of fines there. I think you would make it very let's just say I don't think it's going to get to that. Okay. I don't think the Eagles want to do that. I don't think Zach wants to do that. I think that there can be a resolution for both sides without having it come to that.
Geoff Mosher, Inside the Birds, the new podcast dropped this morning at 6. This is full disclosure, unless you know something I don't know, but full disclosure, just opinion here from you. They trade for a corner, sign a corner, or go with what they got?
This is like that fun game people like to play, right? Like marry and then all right. What do they think is more likely? I would say more likely they sign. I still think sign.
They sign a guy off the street, or they stick with one of the guys that they have here.
Yeah, my 3 in order would be sign, trade, stick.
Okay. And let me ask you this: do you think that guy is like Steve Nelson would be a quality player? You bring him in here, you're going to start having some interesting thoughts. I mean, you have Anthony Harris. I was saying this earlier. You could say Kerrigan is akin to Long, like Anthony. When they brought in Patrick Robinson, nobody thought anything of that move, and he ended up being a terrific player for you. I don't think many people understand how good Harris was a couple of years ago. And it was a nice player. Wilson, it's like, okay, whatever. But all those signings in 2017 were the same. Like, no one was excited about Patrick Robinson or Chris Long or LeGarrette Blount, for God's sakes.
Right. You're right about that. And if you thought people were not excited about Patrick Robinson upon signing, remember what happened 2 weeks into camp when he was getting burned by every single wide receiver on the roster. I mean, there were wide receivers just lining up for one-on-one drills to get a piece of Patrick Robinson. They couldn't wait in training camp. I remember seeing that, Meg, saying, I can't believe this guy would have any confidence left in him after, guys who are running 4.8s are just, just blazing right by him. But he got it turned around. They moved him to the slot, which wound up being a really good decision by him. So, yeah, I mean, you can start to see some pieces forming around here. And again, the Eagles are not tanking. They're not trying to just concede. They're trying to replenish the roster, but also still compete. And that's why I do think they'll add a second cornerback. Now, how good will that second corner be? That's a good question. Steven Nelson's a nice player, but he has been cut by a couple of teams now, and he's still out there. He has a market.
Salary cap dump.
Yeah, but he almost asked for it. If I believe he wanted more money or a trade, and they just said no, we'll just cut you. I thought that's how it went. Yeah. I've talked to a couple of teams around the league. They say that he's okay. He's not what he's had some years where he's had a lot of picks and it makes him look good, but he's a number 2 corner.
Absolutely, but this team needs a number 2.
Oh my God. Yeah. On this team, like he might as well be a superstar behind Darius Slay. I mean, the gulf between him and whoever would start right now as the number 2 corner is as big as one can get.
No, who's that? Craig James at the top?
I would get, or Zach McPherson, the rookie Zach McPherson, perhaps, or whatever. Avonte Maddox.
We know Maddox can't do it. So, and Nicole Roby-Coleman is not signed. He's still out there. If you're thinking about him for the people out there, because I know he's got a little bit of a cult following, but no good. All right, Geoff Mosher, the new Inside the Birds comes out on Thursday. The latest one dropped this morning, so check that out. And everything across the Inside the Birds platform, Q&A, of course, Inside the Birds, ITB TV, and, of course, every day here during football at 4. All right, Moshe, we'll talk to you on Wednesday.
Sounds good, Mike. Have a good one.
And he, like all guests, appeared via the Boardwalk Honda hotline for today's edition of Football at 4. Always enjoy talking to Moshe. We always have some fun there. Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN and the free mobile app. You know, one thing is for sure. The Eagles are always at the top of everybody's mind, and I see a lot of messages coming in down the side here in the chat. If the Eagles get a corner, I will be very intrigued to see reaction from Eagles fans. Because as Mosher said, they're doing their podcast every day or twice a week, and he's saying they're getting a lot of positive vibes all of a sudden. Where are all these positive vibes coming from? Sports Bash Live, 97.3 ESPN. All right, when we come back, do you remember the Phillies scored a whole lot of runs? I got the details. Next. All right, do you remember? All right, here we go. This is fun because we get a chance to go back in time and think about some great names and events that we might have forgotten. We do it every day at this time, and you can be a part of it. Text in 609-403-0973, or if you're watching the live stream. All right, here we go. Josh, you all set for this edition of Do You Remember? May the 17th.
I'm as ready as I'll ever be. I was literally born for this day.
This is your birthday. Do you remember May 17th? Josh Henning was born. Do you remember?
Hopefully. Can't promise anything. Some of them birthdays not really memorable, but
man. Do you remember? All right, here we go. Do you remember this? In 1983, the New York Islanders beat Wayne Gretzky and the Edmonton Oilers to win the Stanley Cup in a sweep at the Nassau Coliseum. It's the fourth straight Stanley Cup. No team since the Islanders has even won 3 consecutive Stanley Cups. How about that? The Islanders, like growing up, were like the Patriots.
Yeah, and they also had the superstar talent to go along with it. And that's part of the reason why it will never happen again, because the NHL has become such a transient league over the last 30 years. Like, even Gretzky played for, 4 or 5 teams by the time he was done? Like, great players almost never stay in the same place anymore.
The fact, though, that it was 1983 and Gretzky was playing, I was like, my God, like, made me feel a little old. Like, I saw, like, my buddy was at my house. My brother-in-law was over yesterday, and he was like, you know, we're watching all these players' kids play, like Guerrero and Biggio and Bichette.
The whole Blue Jays roster is everybody's
God,
kids.
Right? Exactly. I was like, that does make you kind of feel a little old. All right, here's one for you. 1970, Hank Aaron becomes the 9th player to reach 3,000 hits, but the first to have 500 home runs as well. Aaron still ranks 3rd all-time in hits, 2nd in home run, and is one of 6 players as a member of the 3,500 homer club.
Is Hank Aaron underrated?
I would say that's a good question, yeah. I don't think when people go through the list of like the great players, like his name doesn't typically come right at the tip of your tongue, right?
No, it doesn't, because he didn't have the flair that guys like, you know, DiMaggio and Willie Mays and all those guys, Griffey Jr. Those guys had like a little flair to them. Hank was just a lunch pail. I come to work, I do my job, and I go home kind of guy.
I like the 3,500 club, though. That's something that, doesn't get talked about enough there. All right. On this day in 1979, all right, the Phillies beat the Cubs 23-22. There was 50 hits in the game and 11 home runs. I said 50 hits.
Who was pitching?
All right. If you had someone who wasn't interested in baseball, you should have put him in front of this game. It's the second highest scoring game in Major League Baseball history. The Phillies scored 7 runs in the first, with home runs from Mike Schmidt, Bob Boone, and the pitcher Fred Lurch even got into the homer action. The Cubs responded in the bottom of the inning with 6 of their own, including a 3-run home run by Dave Kingman. Remember him?
Oh, yeah.
My gosh. Both starting pitchers, Dennis Lamp and Lurch, went only 1/3 of an inning, giving up a combined 11 earned runs on 11 hits.
But wait, that's not all.
After a scoreless second, Philadelphia put 8 runs on the board. Going into the bottom of the 4th, the Cubs were down 17-6, and they started to come back. They scored 13 runs in the next 3 innings, but still were down 21-16 after 6.
Oh, my goodness.
The Cubs would add 5 more to pull within 1 in the 8th, and Barry Foote singled to score the Cubs' 22nd run to make it 22-22. A scoreless 9th sent the game to extra innings. In the top of the 10th, Mike Schmidt hit his second homer of the day off Bruce Sutter, the closer, Hall of Fame closer. And Raleigh Eastwick retired the side in the bottom of the inning, and the Phillies won 23-22. The game tallied 45 runs, 50 hits, 11 home runs, and some other performances in the game. You ready for these names? Bill Buckner had a grand slam and 7 ribbies.
Yep.
Kingman had 3 homers. Larry Boa had 5 hits. Pete Rose had 3 hits. Gary Maddox went 4 for 4, and Schmidt hit 2 homers, including the game winner. 11 pitchers were used in the game, and it was only a 4-hour game. Some of these games now are even longer than that, and they can't score 45 runs. Only 11,952 showed up to actually see the game.
That's embarrassing.
Right? I don't know where the game was, whether it was at Wrigley Field. It sounds like a Wrigley Field type of game, but coincidentally, the highest scoring game was also between the Phillies and Cubs. That was in 1922. It was 26-23. The Cubs beat the Phillies. So they have scored the most runs against each other in MLB history, not once but twice. I'm out of breath reading that one.
So
that was a lot of preparation I had to do for this game.
Yeah, so really quick clarification for those who are uninformed about Dave Kingman. Dave Kingman was the precursor to Adam Dunn, basically.
Well, he would work well in this day and age. Home run or strikeout.
Strong slugger who that's all he did. It was boom or bust for Kingman and Adam Dunn.
They would be great in this era. Home runs and strikeouts. That's it.
That's all they did.
A couple more. Do you remember 1993? Michael Jordan hits the shot, part 2. He eliminates the Cavs for the playoffs with a buzzer beater mid-range jumper. The Bulls would go on to win their 3rd consecutive NBA title, and then Jordan retired. Went and played baseball.
Yeah, listen, that when Jordan hit a jumper, it was smooth. It always came off his fingers like just silk.
All right, last one for you. Do you remember 1998? Okay. David Wells records the 15th perfect game in Major League Baseball history. He beats the Twins 4-0 at Yankee Stadium. Now, you know, the lore would have it is he was a little hungover.
Yes. And also, I love the fact at the end, him pumping his hands in the air, his shirt's like 3 buttons unbuttoned down.
Oh, yeah. He got the hat, and he's going off on the shoulders, and he's flinging the hat in the air like, I had Jack Daniels last night.
Exactly. He was a very interesting pitcher because he was one of those guys that he was multiple times traded as that like trade deadline guy who was supposed to help somebody. Remember that?
Yeah, he was all Toronto,
the Reds,
all over the place. All right, so there you go. Do you remember what was your favorite one of the day? It has to be the Phillies 23.
Oh, it's gotta be the Phillies, yeah.
Right?
A billion runs, 50 hits. Wild.
50 hits in one game, and it still took less time than these games take today. All right, when we come back, speaking of the Phillies, they didn't score a whole heck of a lot of runs this weekend, but they did get into some fights in the dugout. The Optics next with Bob Wankel. Ah, boy, here we go as the NBA playoffs are about to start tomorrow night. These play-in games will be here. We won't know the Sixers' opponent until probably Thursday night, I think, is when the East play-in games will be resolved. And I would imagine the Sixers, the number one seed in the East, will play either Saturday or Sunday. And, of course, you can hear all the games right here on 97.3 ESPN. We'll take a look at the Sixers, the matchups, the play-in games, this NBA final week, which these play-in games gave it a little bit of push. Can you imagine if there was no play-in tournament, watching the Clippers do what they did the last couple of nights here? Unbelievable. But the play-in tournament gave us some interesting storylines, and I enjoyed it. Like, I don't love this play-in tournament, but at least it did do something for the last. I think they could tweak it and make it a little better. That's all. Mitch Lawrence, longtime NBA writer, Sirius XM NBA radio. He joins me now on the Boardwalk Honda hotline as we're here. Mitch, we made it. The NBA playoffs, the play-in game. Are you a fan of the play-in game?
Well, first of all, hey, Mike, thanks for having me on. I don't think the Clippers did anything bad. These teams always do this in the last few games. And by the way, they got themselves a very favorable first-round matchup. They'll take Dallas out, no problem. They've had experience with the Mavericks. And it looks like if the Lakers get to 7, they won't be in the same bracket as the Lakers. So you can complain about what the what the Clippers did. No, I think they did fine.
I agree with what you're saying. Like, they strategically played it right. It just
okay.
They lost to the Thunder and the Rockets. Yeah. I mean, my God.
Well, that's what you have to do. Now, people say, careful what you wish for. I remember years ago, the Nets had given the Knicks all kinds of problems in the regular season, and they couldn't wait. This was when they had Jason Williams and Derek Coleman and Kenny Anderson, and these guys were like, oh yeah, we really want the Knicks, and the Knicks just swept them out. And Chuck Daly, after that, he was coaching them, said, careful what you wish for. I try to tell these guys they went in overconfident. Regular season sometimes doesn't mean a lot. Now, in terms of the play-in, am I supposed to get excited about a Charlotte team that's lost 16 of the last 21, going on the road where they can't win, and playing an Indiana team that's lost 10 of the last 18? Is that supposed to be a good look for the NBA? No, and I know what's going on. It's a COVID season. It's different. They wanted to, maybe give these teams a little bonus after having such a ridiculously hard schedule. But I'll tell you this, on the flip side, Lakers, Golden State, you will never see a better play-in game than that. Why, Mike? Because you're never going to see the best player in the sport.
Yeah.
And I'm talking about years from now. You never see the best player in the sport against the greatest shooter in the history of the sport. That's not going to happen in a play-in game. So enjoy it while you can, even though it's a late start. But I can't get excited about teams that are sub 500. And that's 5 of the 8 teams. It's only Memphis and the Lakers and the Golden State have got winning records. I can't get excited about these other teams with losing records who are being asked to play extra games. To me, if everybody talks about, the fans of these teams are loving it, it's great for these fans. I'm sure there are a lot of fans in Boston who are like, you know what, we hang banners here. We're not interested in stupid playing games when our team stinks, and we don't deserve to be in it. What we need to do is Danny Ainge needs to figure out a way, whether we need a new coach or new players, we got to get better after such an underachieving, lousy season. I'm sure there are a lot of fans like that. I'm sure there are fans in San Antonio used to winning championships who are like, why are we even getting involved in this? Let's just, forfeit the game and get better, somehow get more talent. I mean, it just strikes me that there are a lot of markets that would look at this and go, you know what, we're not interested. We don't, and it's not just that. I've talked to players who play in the 80s and 90s, and they say, you know what, if that were us, we would be like, no, that's okay. We're going to decline. We need to go home and get all of our games better and come back next year as a better team.
Well, obviously, yeah, I don't love this play-in whole scenario. I certainly don't like the way they set it up. I mean, you already earned the 7 seed. Now I got to play the 8 just to become the 7. I just earned it by playing,
Well, Mike, what is Doc Rivers doing now? Tom Thibodeau has already figured out a way as the 4 seed how he's going to take Trae Young out of that series. And I'm saying that half jokingly. Doc Rivers finished with the 1 seed, and he doesn't know who he's playing yet. That, both the 1s and the 2s in both conferences, to me, that's a little unfair. The 4, the 5, the 3, the 6, they all know who they're playing. They're getting a jump on preparation. That is not good. That's not a level playing field. So, yeah, the league has to do something about that.
Yeah, I agree with that. I said, you're the Sixers or you're the Nets. I mean, you have no idea who you're playing. I mean, and quite frankly,
right.
If you get stuck playing this Washington team who's playing, they've got some good vibes, and you're getting a day to prepare for them. I mean, that doesn't seem now they don't have to say they don't have time to prepare for you either on the flip side, but you're right. Tom Thibodeau's sitting there saying, all right, I got a whole week to map out what I want to do in this series.
Now people will say, there are people out there are going to say, well, the Sixers are the number one team, or Utah's the number one team with the overall, they should be good enough to figure it out in a day or two. Nah, it doesn't work that way. Everybody wants to be on a level playing field when it comes to this stuff, and that's a problem with the system. And, I tell you what, I'm rooting for Washington. I don't have a dog in the fight. I'm totally rooting for Washington. Why? Because I want to see Russell Westbrook go up against Kevin Durant in the first round in the 7 versus 2,
Me too.
Which would be so great because, as you know, Westbrook made fun of Durant when he left Oklahoma City, left Russell Westbrook, standing there holding the bag. Of course, James Harden was long gone. Then Durant leaves to go win a title the easy way with Golden State, and Russell Westbrook is talking about cupcakes. And so I want to see those two guys on the court because there is some genuine, let's call it animosity. I could say hate, but it's probably at this point animosity. And I'd love to, and plus Washington, and I know the regular season may not matter a lot, but Washington has been able to score a lot on the Nets. So I'd still obviously the Nets are the better team, but just to have a kind of a showdown like that between two guys who have had their issues in the past, you can't beat that.
Well, I'll tell you what, Mitch. I mean, you got Durant, Harden, and Kyrie, Bradley Beal, Westbrook. Now, I mean, they don't have a third guy, but those 5 guys on the court going at each other for a series would be a lot of fun.
You sure Kyrie's going to be there, or is he going to be off protesting something, worried about something? You never know, right? I mean, look, the whole thing with the Nets is, and it's fascinating. They've only played 8 games together, the 3. They already have brought out the lack of continuity card, which the Clippers played last year after their whole thing in the bubble. And I have to remind people, if guys aren't getting hurt or guys aren't falling victim to COVID and they're just taking off games for rest, or in Kyrie's case, he's just leaving because he's gone off the rails because he can't deal with what's going on in the world, that's on them. You can't play the continuity card. You can do it with injuries, yes, serious injuries. You can do it with COVID issues in this day and age, unfortunately. But don't talk to me about a lack of continuity when you're resting people all the time like Kawhi does, and when Kyrie is off and running around doing whatever he's doing and not fulfilling his obligation of playing basketball and being, by the way, play very handsomely to do it.
Mitch Lawrence, Sirius XM NBA radio, and of course, Sixers are the number 1 seed. Do they have the feel of an NBA title team to you?
Well, Brooklyn's lurking, which everybody knows. Here's the great thing about Philadelphia. They're finally going to hang a banner. They can finally hang a banner that says they're Eastern Conference regular season champs. In this whole deal involving the process, which happened how many years ago, right? Everybody would tell me, oh, teams, you can't have these teams tanking. And I say, the poster child for tanking are the Sixers. They haven't hung one banner yet. Not one. Now they finally won the East. Now they have reason to celebrate. Now, everybody wants them to do a lot more, starting with their owner and starting with, Daryl Morey and Doc Rivers and all the players. But listen, can they win the East? Absolutely. Do I buy that the Nets are invincible? No, Nets have a lot of flaws. I mean, look, first of all, the Nets are coached by a total neophyte when it comes to playoff basketball, Steve Nash. Okay? Doc Rivers has a lot more experience in playoffs. And by the way, he's coming off a choke job, which got him fired out in L.A. Clipperland. Then you have the fact that, the Nets are not a good defensive team. They got better as time went on, but their whole calling card is obviously, we're going to outscore you. But I want to see what happens in close playoff games down at the end of these games, Mike, where they don't have the reference what the regular season. I'm talking about the 3 guys. Kevin Durant's talking about we have a big 15. No, we're just interested in your big 3. That's Durant, Harden, Kyrie, and how they share the ball and who gets the last shot and how all that stuff works. It happens when you don't play a lot in the regular season. It'll come back to bite. But if they're in a blood and guts series against Philadelphia for the title, it's going to, or even Milwaukee, it could be a little dicey there because they just haven't had this experience. And you talk to players from the past and coaches from the past, they're all eager to see if the Nets can actually just kind of throw this thing together without any kind of real big-time experience, and all of a sudden in the playoffs turn it on. A lot of people don't think they can.
Mitch Lawrence with us. The Sixers are that 1 seed, so we don't know who they'll play in round number 1. But that Knicks-Hawks 4-5 would be the second round opponent. Are any of those two teams upset, worthy?
Well, the Knicks have the best defense going. And I'm sure, Tom Thibodeau knows Tom. Doc Rivers knows Tom Thibodeau. Tom was his big assistant in Boston when they won it in 2008. And the Knicks, the thing that, and look, I would pick Philly over New York, no doubt about it. But it would be a tougher series for them, for Philadelphia, in that the Knicks do play very good defense. And they're one of these teams that don't beat themselves. They play hard all the time. Julius Randle has had a breakout year. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that Julius Randle's as good as Embiid or Simmons. The Sixers are still going to come out with the best players on the court. But the thing about the Knicks is, and here's the other problem for the Knicks, especially against Philadelphia. As much failure as Embiid and Simmons have had, they've been in big-time playoff wars. Lost about this, a tough series against Toronto and Kawhi on that shot that bounced in, 3 or 4 or 5 times. But that is the type of scar that you learn from, and you're gonna benefit from that probably somewhere down the road. Julius Randle, R.J. Barrett have never played in a playoff game. You know what that means? That means you're going to try to learn on the fly. The only guy you can look at and say, well, he's been in the playoffs is Derrick Rose. And Derrick Rose against the Sixers, I mean, he's, if the Knicks get out of the first round against Atlanta, a lot of people are picking him because, hey, they swept him. It's a favorable matchup. But you're going up against a Sixer team that is battle tested in the playoffs, while the Knicks have maybe coming off one series, but still without guys with a lot of experience. And hey, you have to say, no, the Sixers would still be the team, the heavy favorite to get out of that. But will the Knicks be a pain in the neck for them? You bet they will, because of the way they play.
Yeah, that defense would be an interesting series, those two defensive teams. How about the break Philly kind of took when the Heat ended up getting a 6? Are you not worried about the Heat or the fact that Milwaukee and Miami got to play in round number 1? How big of a path break did the Sixers get there?
I'll tell you what, the Bucks were the big losers. The Bucks last week, I believe it was a week ago today, went into San Antonio. Now remember, all they have to do at that time is tie the Nets, and they have the tiebreaker head-to-head. So they finish at 2. They go in, and they give up 87 points in the first half to the Spurs, who finished, 6 games or 5 or 6 games under 500. And they lost that game. They also lost the game at Houston back in late April when Giannis went down. But that was with an injury. Here they just go in, and they just absolutely get smoked by the Spurs team. That cost them the 2 seed. And now at 3, they've got to play Miami. And Miami, what did they do against Miami in the bubble last year? Total meltdown, collapse, whatever you call it. And this is why Mike Budenholzer goes into these playoffs as the coach, the number 1 coach, with the target, the bullseye on his back. Terry Stotts in Portland's under some pressure, obviously. But no, it starts with Mike Budenholzer, because after going to the Eastern Conference Finals a couple of years ago and losing to Toronto, last year took a huge step backward, failed to get out of the second round, won only 1 game. Yes, Giannis was compromised with a knee, but also they looked awful because they couldn't figure out Miami's defense. And now they're going against the same Miami team that went to the Eastern Conference Finals. I know it was in a bubble, but they're going against the same team, Milwaukee, and they've got to figure out Jimmy Butler and all these guys who drove them up the wall last year with Eric Spoelstra. That is a terrible draw for the Bucks.
Yeah, that one is really, because one of those two teams is going to be out, and obviously you're either going to lose last year's Eastern Conference champions or the Bucks again in a conference, Mitch, that most people thought all year long was a 3-team conference: Philly, Brooklyn, and Milwaukee, and one of those teams could be gone.
Yeah, and I still think it's top heavy. I mean, look, 7 or 8. Is probably going to have a sub-500 record. I mean, the Celtics, if they win, they'll be a 1 game above. For years and years, we've heard about, this is all cyclical. Don't worry, there'll be a time when the worst teams in the East, the 7th and the 8th seeds, they'll have winning records. That still's not happening. The East is still, you got 3 teams out West in that play-in. Those 3 teams, starting with the Lakers, who all have winning records and pretty good records at that. And we know it's fluky. It's all about LeBron being out for a lot, 22 or 26 games and missing Davis at points. And, obviously Golden State, it's been Steph Curry by himself because he doesn't have Klay Thompson. and everybody's pushing him for the MVP, it's got to be Jokic. He's played every game, Mike, and he's just had a phenomenal year. And if Chris Paul doesn't finish second, as I tweeted, this has to be a congressional investigation because of what he's done for the Phoenix Suns and the impact he has made, not with scoring, but with leadership and basically showing Devin Booker and DeAndre Ayton the ropes. Here's the problem for Phoenix. They're looking at a first-round series. I would expect the Lakers to win this game on Wednesday night against Golden State, and all of a sudden Phoenix is looking there going, we get LeBron and Anthony Davis in the first round, even though we have home court, and we have no experience compared to those guys. And that massive front with Andre Drummond and Anthony Davis, all we've got is DeAndre Ayton, and after that, it's guys like Frank Kaminsky and Saric. You know what kind of blood's going to be on the court in Phoenix? It ain't going to be LeBron.
No, and that Western Conference is going to be, because if Golden State gets the 1 or the 2, or the Lakers are the 7 or the 8, or I mean the 7, either one of those two teams, you're the 1 or the 2, and thinking, man, we're the 1 or the 2. We got to play Steph Curry and LeBron James. I mean, that is not an enviable thing, and you can make a good argument that the lower seed. I mean, the Clippers in that 4 or 5 game, but Portland could beat Denver too.
Well, without Jamal Murray. You know, Jokic did a great job. This is the other reason Jokic has to be the MVP. Jamal Murray goes down, and the first 10 games without him, they were 9-1. That's when usually a team could collapse a little bit, and they actually improved over the long haul. I know it's been a little rough. I think they're 4-4 in their last 8 without him, and they'll catch up with them. They're not going to go deep without Murray. But even so, regular season-wise, we're talking about regular season voting for Jokic. When a guy who's an MVP candidate not only plays every game, that shouldn't be a special thing, but in this day and age it is, especially with the compressed schedule. But when he can get his team from a 4 seed to a 3 seed with the 5th best record overall, that should lock up the MVP. Now, the problem for Denver is, you know what? They don't have Murray, and that's going to catch up with them. Catch up with them in this round. You know, Portland's an awful, historically bad defensive team, but they've won 10 out of 12, and they've got lured, and they've got some scores. Who knows? Maybe they'll win a couple of shootouts and beat Denver. So it's a bad year for Denver. It looked like to be, coming off that bubble where they went to the Western Conference Finals. You'd say, hey, this year was going to be maybe their year, not to break through, but maybe get back to the Western Finals and try to get the Lakers again. But I don't think they're going anywhere without Jamal Murray.
All right, Mitch Lawrence, Sirius XM NBA Radio. Mitch, how many teams are legitimate title contenders? How many you got?
I'd say in the East, Sixers, Brooklyn. I don't count the Bucks. I have a lot of problems with the Bucks. I just don't know if their big three is big enough to handle the Nets, to handle Philly. And in the West, I still just go with the Lakers. I don't have a lot of faith. My problem is, and everything obviously, Mike, is based on LeBron's health.
Yeah, no doubt.
He will have the most screw. He had to leave the game last night because of the ankle, and this game, it could be a little gimpy here. And if he's gimpy and if he's compromised, that knocks them down a level, and all of a sudden it's a scramble out west. But look, Kawhi Leonard, he's not the same player who he was in Toronto. He wasn't the same player he was in parts of last year. So if Kawhi Leonard is diminished at all, Clippers aren't going anywhere. And I like the move they made for Rajon Rondo. As a matter of fact, the Hawks are going to miss Rajon Rondo in this series. I'm sure Tom Thibodeau loves the fact that he won't have to see him on the court in New York or in Atlanta. But out west, it's very hard. I'm not a big guy on Utah. Mike Conley hasn't played since April 16th. Right? So that's like he's going to start the playoffs basically having not played for 5. It's not Mike Conley. Donovan Mitchell. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I misspoke. Donovan Mitchell, their best player. Now, to their credit, they won the West. That's great. But they have tailed off here without Donovan Mitchell.
Yeah.
And, when you haven't played in 5 or 6 weeks and you're starting up the playoffs, you mean to tell me, you're not hitting the ground running. So that's a problem. And so, there aren't a lot of teams that jump out. Maybe it'll be a surprise team. It's not going to be the Mavericks. I think the Clippers were smart to get them. And the Clippers are in a good spot. And you know what? I think they can get, the thing with the Clippers is they've never been to a conference finals in all their history, which is like the number one longest drought, like all the major sports of a franchise not getting to a conference finals. I think the Clippers have that distinction. It's time they made it, don't you think?
Should be fun. It all starts tomorrow night with the play-ins, and the East is Tuesday. The West is Wednesday. And then, of course, the playoffs begin this weekend. You'll hear them all right here on 97.3 ESPN. With the Sixers, we'll find out who they'll play. Follow Mitch_Lawrence, Sirius XM NBA Radio. And he, like all guests, appeared via the Boardwalk Honda hotline. All right, Mitch, good to talk, pal.
Mike, thanks for having me. Enjoy it. And let's see if the Sixers can make a deep run here.
Let's see. All right, there he goes, Mitch Lawrence. He has them listed as one of the only 3 teams he has winning the title. He has Sixers, Nets, and Lakers. That's it. As guys he thinks can win it all. All right, Sports Bash Live, 97.3 ESPN, brought to you by Matt Blatt Nissan. The all-new Matt Blatt Nissan is now open Black Horse Pike, Egg Harbor Township, next to Home Depot, online, mattblattnissan.com. I'm Mike Gill. This is the Sports Bash. When we return, we will talk with Geoff Kerr from CBS Sports on the NFL. Ryan Kerrigan, does he have anything left in the tank? And did the Eagles have another move up their sleeve? We'll go NFC East with Kerr next. All right, let's get into some NFL with Geoff Kerr, CBS Sports. And, of course, he, like all guests, appears via the Boardwalk Honda hotline. Geoff Kerr, CBS Sports. As we take a look at some NFL news and notes, the Eagles making some news today. Let's bring Geoff Kerr into the conversation. His initial reaction. Howie Roseman goes out and gets the all-time sack leader in Washington football history, Geoff. They bring in Ryan Kerrigan. Kind of an interesting signing. What's the message?
I'll tell you what, Mike, I don't know if there's an actual message involved. It's just the Eagles getting a player that is very talented to add to their already strong defensive front. That's how I look at it. I mean, look, they didn't need to add Ryan Kerrigan, but they had an opportunity to get a good player who can play in a part-time role for them. And, pretty much that's it. I mean, you can put Ryan Kerrigan on the outside now. You can move Brandon Graham on the inside. Think of this, Mike. You can have a front four of Ryan Kerrigan, Brandon Graham, Fletcher Cox, Derek Barnett / Josh Sweat. I mean, that's a pretty good pass rush.
You're absolutely right. I was talking about that earlier, is that, I'm interested to get your take, Geoff, on how much gas Kerrigan has in the tank. I mean, he didn't play a lot last year, still had 5.5 sacks, terrorized the Eagles even last year, won Defensive Player of the Week against them. But I look at Brandon Graham, who's 33, same draft class, and I don't think people look at him as a guy who's out of gas. So is Kerrigan out of gas, or did he just have two players that were young and very talented in front of him?
I think what Washington did was, when they drafted Chase Young, I think that signaled the end of Ryan Kerrigan. And ultimately, Chase Young is going to be a stud in this league. You drafted him number 2 overall pick, and he did not disappoint. He was Rookie of the Year last year for a reason. He's going to get even better. So Ryan Kerrigan's snaps were going to be diminished no matter what. They got a gem in the draft with Montez Sweat, who was drafted after Andre Dillard, let me mind you, in 2019. So again, Montez Sweat, he's a stud on the edge. You got Jonathan Allen, you got Deron Payne. Ryan Kerrigan was more of a luxury for them, and they could afford to play him 38% of the snaps or whatever it was last year. And they used Ryan Kerrigan to the best of their ability last year. And look, I'm sure Ryan Kerrigan knew the writing on the wall. I didn't think his stats diminished by any means, depending on how much he played. He was much more productive than, say, a Vinny Curry was last year for the Eagles, and they're the same age. So to me, it was just more of, there were too many, there wasn't enough vacancy at the end. I guess that's how I would word it. And, Ryan Kerrigan was a free agent. I was shocked that it was this long, but I don't think teams wanted to give up a compensatory pick for a part-time player like Ryan Kerrigan, which is what he is at this point in his career. And I got to give the Eagles credit. They pounced on it. I think there were a lot of teams interested in him, but at the end of the day, Ryan Kerrigan seemed to want to stay in the NFC East, and kudos to the Eagles for bringing him in.
Well, he also, not only did he want to stay in the NFC East, it was the fact that he looked at, they rotate their ends, they're going to rotate the end, and there's not a lot of depth here. I mean, they needed to bring in another guy, because after Josh Sweat, and obviously Barnett and Graham, there's not a lot of, there's not a whole heck of a lot with NFL experience. So Kerrigan looked at it as a way that, hey, I'm not only going to play, I'm going to have a real role on this team. Yeah,
and Jannard Avery's basically transitioning the linebacker now, so he was out. I thought he was a solid depth piece, and maybe the Eagles do have him rush the passer a bit. But again, if he's changing positions, you're going to need someone in there. And look, bringing in a guy like Ryan Kerrigan, all of a sudden, you have tons of depth at him at defensive end. You're absolutely right, Mike. Outside of Josh Sweat, there wasn't much there. And if one guy gets hurt, Eagles are pretty much done for. I mean, there wasn't like a what was the 3rd round pick from the other year from the Texans? I'm forgetting his name. I'm drawing a blank on it.
Who? Philadelphia?
Yeah, on Philadelphia. He was a 4th, 3rd round pick of the Texans. He was there last year. He got cut. It's pretty productive for them. I'm drawing a blank on that. I'm going to remember as soon as we get done this segment. But he's gone now. So you didn't have that much depth there. So to me, Ryan Kerrigan is more of a luxury than anything, because they didn't need that. I mean, I'd rather see him get a cornerback at this point. But again, we talked about this before. I think they're going to go the trade route for that. But when you have a talented guy like Ryan Kerrigan available in free agency,
yeah,
you got to improve your team. Look, this isn't the NBA. You just don't try to go 0-16 here.
No, well, I think the interesting part here is they got a guy who adds depth to a spot. They needed depth on the defensive line. There's no question. Their starters are fine. Barnett and Graham, fine. Sweat, good rotational guy. They needed another guy, and not only teaches this crew. He's still a guy that can give you production. My question is now, Geoff, if they go out and get a starting level corner, is this a team that we change the perception of?
I don't know if we would change the perception of it, but I think it would fill a lot of holes on this defense that, in my mind, it isn't a bad defense if you look at it. We just look at all the holes, who's going to play cornerback opposite of Darius Slay.
Big question. Big question.
Exactly. The linebacking core, we think it's set with Eric Wilson and Alex Singleton. If they play 3 linebackers, we'll see who gets in that role if they go into a base defense. But they seem to be set at linebacker. They're set at defensive tackle. They're set at defensive end. The defensive front's going to be one of the best in the league, regardless. Again, we have Anthony Harris. At the same time, Rodney McLeod. We'll see how he comes back. He looks like he has something to prove. I think they need depth in that secondary, and we'll see what happens. But they definitely focused on the draft after the first 2 rounds on defense, and honestly, Mike, I think this defense is going to be a little better than a lot of people give it credit for, especially with the pass rush, because it is one of the best pass rushes in the NFL. I just think we're curious of what the secondary is going to be at this point.
Oh, there's no question. They need help at corner. The safety spot, I think Harris can play. We don't know what McLeod's going to be when he comes back. The linebacker should be better with Wilson. That gives them a better duo than they had last year. And their line, they had the 3rd most sacks in football last year. Adding Kerrigan should add to that. So, yeah, I mean, it's all really, if that safety spot, if Harris is the player he was 2 years ago as opposed to the guy he was last year, and McLeod comes back healthy, it's that other corner spot's the big hole on this team right now. Geoff Kerr is with us looking at Kerrigan. Ryan Kerrigan signs with the Eagles today. What about Zach Ertz? Not there, voluntary, not a big deal. But I guess the question, Geoff, is what is the end of the road? What's the end game here? When do they make a move? When are they forced into doing something here?
Well, it seems like June 1st is going to be, the end-all, be-all here. And the Eagles can designate him as a post-June 1st cut and save $8.5 million of cap space, and then Zach Ertz can do what he wants. I still think the Eagles want a 3rd or 4th round pick for this guy. The thing is, I don't know who's going to give up a 3rd or 4th round pick for a guy who only had 30 catches for 300 yards last year and just did not look good for the majority of the season. Now, I know he was battling an ankle injury. I think Zach Ertz is a much better player than people give him credit for at this stage in his career. I think he would be better served being on the Eagles and just playing out his contract than you let him go for nothing. But I understand that he's unhappy. He probably wants to be an Eagle for life, and the Eagles have basically decided we're not going to do that. We're going to move on from you. But I think this team would be better if Zach Ertz would be here in 2021. I just don't think Zach Ertz wants to make that the case.
So, I mean, he's a no-show. Obviously, that's not a big deal. It's a voluntary thing. He's unhappy with the contract. But if they don't release him and they say, look, we have him under the cap, we're just going to keep him. Does he sit out the whole year? I mean, do you see a stare down to where it gets to that level?
See, this is what's going to be tough. If he misses mandatory minicamp, he gets fined. If he misses time in training camp, he gets fined. I'm sure the Eagles and him will come to an ultimatum at some point in July if they choose to do that. I think what the Eagles are afraid of ultimately is he's going to go pair up in Indianapolis with his buddy and Carson Wentz. And I think Eagles are looking at the Colts and saying, give us one of those valuable draft picks you have again, and we'll send them to you. We don't have a problem with that. I just don't think the Eagles want to let him go for nothing.
Kevin Costner going to jump on the phone and say, I want my picks back?
Yeah, that might be the case. By the way, that's a terrible movie. I don't know how people watch Draft Day. But beside the point there, I honestly think the Eagles would rather just keep the guy. I really do. I just think, look, it's like you said, Mike, we're under the cap. We're a better team with him. We feel we have a chance to compete with him. And maybe, Zach Ertz, I just don't see Zach Ertz as the type of player that's going to hold out. I really don't. This part of the offseason, sure. Mandatory minicamp, I think he shows up if he's still on the team.
Right. I would say for the people out there reading, he didn't show up to this. This isn't a big deal. There's a lot of guys who just decided they're not going to show up to the voluntary stuff. This is a more widespread thing than it has been in the past. Because typically, Geoff, in the past, voluntary workouts, man, you better be there.
Yeah, exactly. And, it was voluntary, but it wasn't voluntary. In a way, it still kind of is. But now I think players have a little more say in that. And, I remember when they had the voluntary portion of minicamp, they're like, oh, it's perfect attendance. I'm like, well, yeah, because the coaches are basically making it a perfect.
Yeah, exactly.
Now they don't have to be there. If they don't want to be in the NovaCare complex, that's their right. But if they get hurt outside the NovaCare complex, that's where the problems come. That's why players show up, because if they get hurt inside the facility, then, that's on the team's dime. That's not on their dime. So, again, Zach Ertz has every right to do what he wants to do. I have no problem with that. I think when they have mandatory minicamp June 8th through 10th, I think he comes.
Frank Reich also speaking, he says, I'm very confident that he has a team around him. He said, I stick my neck out for people I believe in. This is going to I feel like this Wentz-Reich thing, this whole Wentz in Indianapolis thing is going to be following Wentz around everywhere he goes this year. Is he back or is he broken? Which one is it?
I honestly don't know. To be honest with you, I think he's a broken player right now. But he looked like a broken player last year. He just looked like a guy who just did not want to be in Philadelphia anymore. And I think it got even worse when he got benched, and he probably heard the rumblings from his agent and everybody else. Hey, the Colts want you. You should go to the Colts. And, I'm sure I don't want to, get family issues involved, but it seemed like his wife, wanted to go back to the Midwest. And, that's completely fine. I mean, I'm not going to, assume anything here, but it just seemed like the Carson Wentz marriage with the Philadelphia Eagles was on the rocks for the majority of last year, specifically when the Eagles drafted Jalen Hurts, even though Wentz made a bigger deal out of that than what it needed to be. And, you're right, Mike. He's just tied to Frank Reich at this point. And I don't have a problem with that. If he feels that's his best chance of succeeding in the NFL and becoming a Pro Bowl player, more power to him. I hope the Eagles get the first-round pick for him. It seems like, in a way, Frank Reich kind of said the Eagles suck, but he didn't say they sucked. And, that's why Carson Wentz failed. It just seems like no one ever holds Carson Wentz accountable for playing bad. There's always excuses from the fans, the media, where it's the offensive line, where it's the receivers, and that's all true. But Carson Wentz, if he is as good of a player as I thought he was, as you thought he was, as anybody thinks he was, he should have been better than what he was last year, and he just wasn't. So I don't know if he can be fixed. I'm wishing the best for him in Indianapolis. I kind of hope he gets his career back on track. I want to see him do well, and I want to see the Eagles do well.
All right, another interesting. What do you think of this? What Jacksonville's doing with Travis Etienne, making him a wide receiver? I mean, we all said, why would you take a running back in the first round when you already had Robinson, who was 1,400 yards last year as an undrafted? So you take a running back. Well, they don't plan on using him at running back. Apparently, he's going to play wide receiver, it looks like.
I think Urban Meyer he kind of tipped his hand a little bit on what he was going to do with Travis Etienne on draft weekend, because he goes, look, we view him as a third down running back. And they're like, oh, okay, that makes sense, because now you pair him, you use James Robinson on the heavy downs and you use Travis Etienne in the passing game. And I think that's what it is. I think he's putting him at wide receiver, because this is the way the running back position is going in the NFL. They have a short shelf life to begin with. And Urban Meyer, at least in my opinion, is just using Etienne in the best way he can. And if you're going to line him up in the slot, you're going to line him up on the outside and use his abilities to catch the football to your advantage, then do that. Look, this is the thing with Travis Etienne. He led the ACC in receiving yards in each of the last 2 years. He led the ACC in receiving yards for running backs, I should say, over the last 2 years. And I got to give him credit for that. Look, he's using the guy to his advantage. He wants to see him and James Robinson on the football field. And this is the best way to do it. You have Travis Etienne under a rookie contract. When it's James Robinson's time to go, maybe Jacksonville moves on from him, or maybe Urban Meyer's gone by then you make Travis Etienne the running back one. He's going to get his carries. He's going to get his yards, but he's going to get his touches. It's just going to be in a variety of different ways.
Do you buy anything that Matt Nagy's selling as Andy Dalton is his starter?
No, he is not. I'm sorry. He is not QB1. The Bears are foolish. It's Justin Fields. Hey, Justin Fields has to be starting for this football team week 1. Justin Fields should be Andy Dalton out for this starting job. He can probably be him out for the starting job with his left hand. I'm dead serious about that. I don't know what the love affair is with Andy Dalton. I never got it. I can't believe the guy actually made 3 Pro Bowls as a quarterback. To me, he's a good, he's a decent starter. He's a game manager. If the Bears wanted to make him the quarterback this year and not have Justin Fields on their roster, fine. You're asking yourself to go 6-10, 7. I'm sorry, 6-11, 7-10. I gotta get the 17-game schedule right here. But Justin Fields, I think you are a much better football team, because he can scramble, he can run, he can throw on the run, he can throw in the pocket. Al Robinson and Darnell Mooney are going to shine with this guy. David Montgomery emerged as one of the best running backs in football last year, especially toward the last half of the year. And that was with Mitchell Trubisky running the football around and being the quarterback of the Chicago Bears. What's he going to do when, Justin Fields is there? Tariq Cohen's back. If this offensive line is better Chicago's going to be dangerous.
People forget they made the playoffs last year.
Yeah, exactly. They're going to be better. They're going to compete with Green Bay, and that's what I want to see. I get on the Bears a lot. I make fun of their fans a lot, but they are spot on here. I think they are going to be instantly a better football team with Justin Fields as a starting quarterback.
You remember the 3rd round pick?
Ooh, this year?
No, the 3rd round pick that you couldn't remember.
Did
it hit you? To Deshaun Hall.
Deshaun, that's it. You know what? I almost said Dante Hall, and I knew that wasn't right. It started with a D. I said as soon as I go off the air, I'm going to be like Deshaun Hall.
Wow, that's why I was saying. After all this, did it come back and hit you again?
Well, you know what I was thinking, because you said Bears. I was thinking Bears Giants straight for a second because there was a 3rd round pick involved in there.
All right. Well, Ryan Kerrigan signs with the Eagles today. There's your Eagles news. They continue to kind of make news even in this offseason. They have the voluntary camps going on right now as well. We'll have more on that. And, of course, Geoff Kerr, like all guests, appeared via the Boardwalk Honda hotline. All right, Geoff. Good stuff, man.
Thanks for having me on, Micah. Busy Monday, but I wouldn't have it any other way.
Absolutely. And we think this will be a busy week. And who knows, could be more moves coming from Howie Roseman, as now looks everybody out there saying, hey, when are they going to go get that corner now? That could be the next move for the Eagles. It's playoff time, big stakes, bigger promotions. It's time to hammer the over and score some cash. DraftKings Sportsbook is giving you a chance to lower the over-under on a featured playoff game. All players who place a bet on the featured basketball game will have a hand in lowering the over-under on the game. That's right. For every 1,500 players who bet the over on a select game, the over-under will drop by 1 full point. Every bettor who hammers the over in the featured game helps to lower the game's over-under. The best part is that even as the line lowers, the odds remain at even money. That's right. You can double your money by hammering the over. DraftKings is safe, secure, and reliable, so you can deposit and withdraw your funds at your convenience. Download the top-rated DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use my promo code 973 when you hammer the over. For every 1,500 people that bet the over in the featured game, the line will decrease by 1 point. It's your chance to improve the odds of the over hitting. So tell your friends and family this is a team effort. Everybody go bet the over and improve your odds of doubling your money. But you got to use my promo code 973 for a limited time only at DraftKings Sportsbook. Must be 21 or older. Jersey only. Restrictions apply. Max $25 wager, 1 per customer. Offer ends 5/23/21. See DraftKings.com/sportsbook for details. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. All right, here we go. It's time for the sound of the day. Let's see what stood out to my producer, Josh Henning, whose birthday is today, by the way. He is 36 years of age.
That is correct information.
I remembered that. Kept that top of my mind. Here we go. All right, Geoff Mosher was on for football at 4. And interesting comment he made there, because for people who think this team will not be competitive this year, well, that's not their mindset.
The Eagles are never tanking. They're always trying to compete. They're trying to replenish the roster. No doubt they're not as aggressive this year in free agency because they can't be with their money, but they're always trying to build the best way possible to be able to both win and turn the roster over at the same time.
Eagles are never tanking, but I think he made an interesting part about the money, is that they couldn't go out and fix this team as much as they wanted to. This team is going to be right back in the free agent game next year. I don't think that this even if they struggle a little bit this year, I think they're right back at in the free agent mix right again next year, because their cap situation is going to be much better.
Yeah, and don't forget about the fact that this is a team, I wrote about this 97.3 ESPN.com today. They've bounced from worst to first, not once, but twice in the last 10 years. So this is an organization that has rebuilt and turned things around quickly in the past. It's not beyond repair to think that they could figure out a way to do it again.
Geoff Mosher, what is the most important part for this team to win?
They're pretty good on the offensive and defensive line still. And when you're good at those, you have a chance to win most games that you're going to be in. Now, then it comes down to, do you get the great quarterback play? Do you get your great playmaker, wide receiver play? Can you force some turnovers? And that's where this team has kind of been deficient over the last year. And so I have no idea. I'm not going to sit here and say there are X amount of wins, because you just don't know.
But the offensive and defensive line, important to winning. That's probably the strength of their team.
And it's not sexy. I know it doesn't win you fantasy football games, but it wins real world football games. I think that's the real important part here, Mike. And that is, if you have a good offensive and defensive line, you have a chance.
I have said over and over, their offensive line, if healthy, is the best in the division and maybe one of the top 3 or 4 in all of football. So if you can keep that line healthy, and the defensive line for that matter, because now you got some older guys. You've got Kerrigan and you've got Graham, who are both 33 years old at the start of this season. Fletcher Cox starting to, it's funny. People think Lane Johnson is old,
right?
And Brandon Brooks is old, but no one ever mentions Fletcher Cox because he hasn't had the injury history.
Correct.
But Fletcher's another guy who's hitting that 30-year-old dial all of a sudden.
I think people also forget that, these athletes have access to the best medicine, the best rehab, and the best everything on planet Earth. So if anybody's going to recover, it's going to be them from these things.
Well, I talked about that the other day, is that, you come back from an Achilles injury, an ACL, a lot differently now than you did, even 10 years ago, where if that was an injury, you were not going to be the same player.
Right.
You remember when Tom Brady tore his ACL. That next year, he was not the same player.
Correct.
It was the second year that Tom Brady finally came back. Yeah, Fletcher Cox, by the way, is now 30 years old. So you got Brandon Graham, Kerrigan, Fletcher Cox. They are all going to start the year 30 or older on that Eagles defensive line there. So if you think that Lane Johnson and Brandon Brooks are old, you got to start including Fletcher Cox into that mix too.
Hey, got to have a balanced approach here.
All right, let's go over to the Sixers, who got the number 1 seed in the East. But how about Tyrese Maxey? Is he making Doc Rivers think a little bit more about his role come playoff time?
This kid just it's a skill set that they haven't had at any point during the Joel Embiid, Ben Simmons era. It's a skill set that no one on this current roster other than Tyrese Maxey has, and it's just that ability to take people off the dribble and get to the rim. That's something that it's a big element that has been missing from this offense for years, and he provides it.
So, should there be a bigger role for Tyrese Maxey come playoff time?
I think you have to seriously consider it, because you're going to be going against teams in the postseason that are going to have their own things they can present challenges with. When you're talking about these other teams around the league, not everyone has a good defense. Outside of the Knicks, the Sixers, and the Heat, who else plays defense? So why not have a guy out there who can break them down? Then you have to depend on just
Well, the question
Ben
I
Simmons
asked Paul
and Shake.
was at the expense of who?
I say it's the expense of Furkan.
Yeah, I don't know that Furkan's playing the same role, though.
No, but he might be playing, minutes previously that maybe were allotted to him that maybe you need to pull back on.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much that's going to be. I don't know how much Furkan's I don't know how many minutes he's getting in the playoff. That'll be interesting to see how much trust does Doc Rivers have in some of these bench guys. He said, I'll play 11 guys. Do we believe him? Yeah.
I have trouble, like Paul said earlier, it's hard to believe him when he says stuff like that because we don't really know for sure.
All right, Sixers playoffs begin this weekend. We'll find out who they play on Thursday night. We'll have an answer to who the 8 seed in the Eastern Conference will be. If I'm a betting man, right now I would think it's going to be Boston. I would say Washington beats Boston tomorrow night.
Yeah.
They go to be the 7 seed. They'll play Brooklyn in round 1. That will be a blast. I'm all eyes on that series.
That might go 7 games.
And then that would be interesting. And then I think Charlotte beats Indiana, and then Boston beats Charlotte.
I can see that.
That would be how I see the Eastern side going. I think the Lakers beat the Warriors, and then the Warriors beat Memphis. Lakers are 7, Warriors are 8. Josh has Ben Golliver to talk NBA in 20 minutes.